Good morning. Welcome into Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. I'm Ravi, Lulla. That's Elijah Herbel in with me this morning here on the Pillar Exterior stage. What's up, Elijah?
How are we doing? It's good to be here.
I know. I'm doing good here at the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. I know it's a little earlier in the day than you're usually on the air. How are you doing this morning?
Well, good. It's I got used to it last week because for those that aren't in Lincoln, don't know, Schmitty does a morning news talk show every single day, and Schmitty being on vacation last week, man, I was filling in for him.
Okay.
So I got the sleep schedule down right for the most part.
Perfect.
I'm still not a go to bed when the sun is still up kind of guy, so you always have to adjust to that. But in radio, I mean, you learn how to put together a good show regardless of whether or not you have sleep.
Yeah. I mean, sleep is not a necessary part of doing this job, especially, you get to some of the sporting events that run late and you're just I'm only sleeping for a couple hours tonight. Let's go.
Yep.
So we're happy to have Elijah here today. Just as a programming note, DB won't be in all week. He's fine. It's just the West Side High School coaching situation. They've got their training camp, or I don't know what they call it, summer camp, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's I think they added this back whenever I was in high school, where I assume this is what it is. I have not talked to Damon. We'll talk about it this morning. But all the high school teams are afforded 1 week throughout the summer to have a full padded week of camp.
Yep.
Before you start up fall camp. And there's always like the discussions you see during the summertime of when teams do it. So some do it in June to kind of break up the monotony of summer whenever it's still cool. Some teams like to kind of stack it before fall camp.
Yeah, so you got extra practice, basically.
Yeah, So that was a good addition back in the I think that was the summer before my junior year they added that. And I think we've seen the benefits in high school football where teams seem more ready by the time week one rolls around.
100%.
And it's also always a really, really fun week for the players and for the coaches to kind of get that monotony of summer broken up, be like, all right, we got the pads popping, let's have some fun.
It makes you realize, like, hey, we're not that far away. We're getting pretty close to it. So DB will be back next week, but he'll also be joining us every day for at least a segment just to kind of chime in and give us his thoughts about what's going on. He can't go a whole week without getting his takes out. So
Let's go, baby! Live with a whistle in his mouth.
Yeah. So we'll check in with DB in the 9 o'clock hour today. Before that, though, we're going to talk to Blair Kerkoff at 7:45 of the Kansas City Star. He was at Big 12 Media Days last week. He's going to be at SEC Media Days coming up. So we will talk to him about that. It was, the good old Deion Sanders show last week. We'll see what happens at SEC Media Days this week. But then we've got Sam McKewon at 8 a.m. from the Omaha World-Herald. But for July, Elijah, weirdly busy weekend for sports. We can start with, I guess we can start with, because they were just showing it on TV here, the madness at the Copa America last night. Because, and don't worry, we're not going to get like real nitty gritty into soccer here. This is more about like the riot that happened before the soccer game. I don't know if you saw the videos. I know you saw some of them, but for our listeners, I don't know if you saw the videos. If you haven't, go find on the Twitter machine, just put in Copa America and you'll find them. People were crawling through. They were like John McClaning through vents to try and get into this game. Like, there's nothing I like that much. Not a thing. To crawl through vents to try and, I don't understand it.
Well, did you see some of the ticket prices that fans were going to be forced to pay to get into this game?
Yes.
It was like, you're talking nosebleeds at Hard Rock Stadium were running you almost $2,000.
Yeah, your get-in price was somewhere around $2,000 for the worst seat in the house.
Yeah.
Which is aggressive. Mm-hmm. I understand that. But, television exists, I get it's a big deal, and I know nothing, I don't know. I get that nothing we do as Americans, gets to that level, really. I can't fathom ever being I'm an adult. I'm gonna try and climb through an air vent to try and see a game.
And Travis chimes in on the stream here saying that was a fan issue, not a venue problem. I agree. I also will say the organizers of Copa America have turned this entire tournament into an S show.
Oh,
you get what I'm saying?
100%.
It was a mess, terrible fields all tournament long.
Terrible officiating.
There were overpriced seats.
Yeah.
So half empty venues for most of the tournament. You had the brawl in the stands in the semifinals.
Yeah, with Uruguay.
Because there was not enough security up around the field to keep players and fans from
lack of security seems like a recurring issue here.
You had the coach of Uruguay get up in his post-game or post-match press conference, essentially, and say, like, the organizers should feel ashamed for themselves for how they've put this tournament on. And it was further exemplified by what we saw last night. I will say, from an outsider's perspective, just watching the madness ensue was kind of fun. A little bit, to be like, oh my God, they're crawling through air vents to get into the stadium and hopping fences. And I feel bad for some of the attendees because people were showing up to their seats and there was just like a row of Colombians sitting in their seats, and Screw's like, we can't do anything.
Yeah, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, sorry. Go find somewhere else to stand, I guess.
Well, and eventually they just closed the gates, and so people with tickets were left on the outside. People without tickets were in the game or in the stadium, and it was a cluster.
Well, and then right before kickoff, they just opened up the gates. No security, no ticket. There's like, all right, everybody who's out here, just walk in.
It was a free-for-all.
Yeah, just go.
And it was like, in what world is that the answer? I don't know. The whole thing was a complete cluster, and then you had the actual match, which, it was kind of there's a spider crawling on my camera right now.
Yeah,
you see that? I'm just very sorry. It's very distracting. It's tiny, but there was, if you were watching both matches yesterday, the Euros and the Copa America, the difference in style of play was like watching the Big Ten versus the Big 12 in football.
Sure.
Like Copa America, they were just beating the hell out of each other. And then, the European soccer is a little bit, it's a more beautiful game a little bit, as the Brazilians like to call it.
Spain's game's got a little more finesse to it.
Yes, right? And so I'm sitting there watching both of those. I'm like, dear God, this isn't even the same sport. Like, what are we doing here? It was, and this was the whole way throughout the tournament, but it was like Copa America, those games are like fistfights.
Yeah.
It's brutal. And I don't know. I sometimes wonder, and not that the U.S. would be any better, but I'm like, maybe would the U.S. do a little better in like a European style where it's like, hey, they're not like fist fighting these people on the pitch all the time?
Well, you would think, and then you watch the U.S. show up at the World Cup and just...
And you're just like, never mind. Wouldn't matter anyway.
Well, the U.S., and it's kind of both the Americas with both CONCACAF, which is the North American side of things the U.S. plays in, where it's much more... fist fighty, but then you also just get that kind of whenever teams play the U.S., like, well, we're just going to put all 11 guys in our own box and we're going to dare you to score. And whenever you do come in the box, we're going to beat the hell out of you.
Yeah.
Which is a fun style you have to deal with. And then you get like the South American style, which is the same, except instead of packing it into the box, they're going to run at you across the field and then beat the hell out of you.
Yep.
Which in either sense, I kind of enjoy it. I think it's kind of fun. I think you need a little bit of that fist fighty style in soccer.
And the South American teams are typically a lot more skilled too. So like they're like, yeah, we're going to score and then we're going to beat you up. So that's it. That was an interesting, kind of an interesting match there. Argentina wins their third major trophy in the last 3 years, I think, between the last Copa and then the World Cup as well. But a country that has not been winning a lot of trophies recently, besides the U.S., England lost in Euros, and I have the hardest time. I don't know. I have like this weird, fascination with English soccer because I can't figure out why they're not better. Like literally, I looked this up yesterday because I was like, okay, they've got the best professional league in the world in the English Premier League, and I know people like Bundesliga, La Liga, whatever, but like Premier League is the best league in the world. And 35% of that league is English people, right? So 35% of the best league in the world is English people. They have one major trophy ever, and it was in 1966. Like, I don't understand how they don't win ever. So if you're a Nebraska fan, you're like, hey, like we need to get back on top here. Like, you're not England. Like, that's at least... You've got at least a little bit of solace there. Like, I don't understand it, even a little bit.
I don't think English fans understand it either.
I can't figure it out.
And let's not act like they haven't had their opportunities, because they have 2 straight Euros finals. Gareth Southgate's done really well for himself. A decent World Cup run in Qatar just a couple years ago. They've had great players. It just feels like, and let's be honest, there's a little bit in any sport, but especially in these summer international tournaments, there's a little bit of luck to it.
Oh, sure. 100%.
Guys pick up injuries throughout their seasons, and they're not going to go for the World Cup or whatever tournament they're going to be playing in.
We saw Messi got hurt last night.
Yeah. You have the aspect also of like sometimes players just have a bad tournament.
Sure. Yeah. It's a small sample size compared to their league season.
Yep, where it's not in the Premier League, it's 38 games you're playing to go determine who the best is, where in these tournaments, you're playing 6, maybe 7 games.
Yeah, if you go the whole way.
And stylistically, you're playing very different stylistic matchups every single time, and it's all condensed down into this very small schedule. You're playing once every 4 or 5 days, so it comes down to depth as well, where now you have to have guys that are playing on the bench in the group stage. They've got to come off the bench in the knockout stage and go start a game and put in a performance. It's a little bit of luck to it. I think England also succumbs to the pressure that their entire country puts on them every single time.
Yep.
Where we invented this game. We're going to bring it home this year. Like, we deserve to win it because we invented soccer. They succumb to that pressure a little bit. And then you also have a lot of the best English players have a world of issues off the field. And I think that also is a little bit of English media puts pressure on them too, where it's, go look at the laundry list of guys from English soccer that have just absolute basket case type off the field things that go on with them. With Paul Gascoigne, you have Wayne Rooney, you have Frank Lampard. Frank Lampard's another one that had some off the field issues. On this team, Phil Foden's got issues with baby mamas. You have Kyle Walker, who broke COVID restrictions to go and visit some female friends that he may have paid money to. Like, there is just always people watching in English media. I think that also adds a little extra pressure to people whenever it's like,
for sure,
everyone's talking about you. It's like, well, can he overcome his personal struggles in the Euros? Yeah. Like, that adds to it. I don't think there's any one answer, but I think you can make parallels to like Nebraska football. Just like there's all this pressure that gets puts on these guys, and everyone's talking about it, and everyone for 2 years, maybe they're going to do it in the Euros this year. Maybe it's going to be this year where they finally break the curse. Yeah. I think there's a little bit of that where just everyone talking about it so much adds so much pressure to these guys that it's a little bit in their heads.
The expectation level, for sure, I think is an issue there. I do think there is a little bit of a Nebraska football tie in there, but it would be like if Nebraska football put 35% of the Division I players into Division I and then still was not good enough to win a championship at any level. It's almost, I think it's probably closer, because I was trying to find like an American parallel, and it's really difficult because it's such a unique like one sport country. And, because, United States basketball doesn't get the year-round level of attention that like English soccer does, right? Like Team USA basketball, and they win most of the time. But that's probably the closest on an international level, as if Team USA hadn't won an Olympic gold medal since 1966 or whatever. I guess it would have been like 68. But that's one that I thought of. The other one I weirdly thought of was, and this is probably a little closer, was Texas football, where they had that long drought from 70 to 2005 or whatever, or 2005. And they put, not 35%, but they obviously put a huge amount of talent, but there's also a million other things to root for in Texas, as opposed to Nebraska or England, where you're really just focusing on the one thing. And I can't even imagine living in a place like that, where that's the only thing anyone cares about for the most part, sport-wise, and you're just banging your head against the wall for 60 years. Like, we think it's been bad for 20. It's really only been bad for like 10. And we are losing our minds. I can't imagine it.
The two parallels that I can find across grander sports, I go to baseball for both. The drought of the Red Sox and the drought of the Cubs.
Sure. Yeah.
Where you look at it and you go, there were so many teams that the Red Sox had.
Yeah, they were good.
That should have won a World Series.
100%.
Same with the Cubs. And they finally both broke their curses eventually. But it's because, you have this long season where everyone's talking about, man, this is the year. This is the year they're finally going to do it. They're fantastic this year. Look at the talent that they have. And at the end of the day, it comes down to 7 games you're playing in October, which is at the end of a long season. Bodies are beaten down. There's a little bit of luck to it in baseball, too.
100%.
One injury can totally ruin your World Series chances. It's kind of the same in soccer, where it's like one injury can ruin it. And, you have this long season that you're playing, and now you got to rip it all up. And in soccer, you have the added combination of you're playing with a completely new team in the summertime that you haven't played with for 2 years.
For sure.
And, our best player got injured at the end of the season, which kind of happened with Harry Kane in England. He's been dealing with a back injury. Like, you have to go deal with that. And there's a little bit of luck when it comes down to 7 games, too, where that's the best comparison I have, is like there were so many teams, the Red Sox and the Cubs, that could have won it and should have won it and didn't win it. And it's probably the best I have. England probably win one eventually. Yeah, I think so.
You would think so. Just from the pure talent standpoint, you would think they'd have to luck out and get it done eventually. But it's been wild to kind of watch them struggle, because they've gone through, you mentioned they made the last couple Euro finals and things like that, but they went through a stretch where they weren't even playing well. Like, they weren't even getting to the chance to break this drought. And baseball is a good example because of the long regular season then condensed into, I mean, you're talking about 162 games, and then you got to win 4, right, to make it out of and before, I mean, not that long ago, the first round was, I think it was 5-game series, or best of 5. Now you've got the wild card. It's a best of 3, and it's a total departure from how the actual regular season is played. Right? You have this kind of game of attrition throughout the course of a regular season where you're playing for 7 months, and then all of a sudden, I guess 6 months, and then all of a sudden it's like, all right, you've got a week. Good luck. So baseball is actually a really good one, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see who the U.S. decides to name as their manager. It's not going to be Jurgen Klopp, who I really want it to be, but that would be pretty cool.
Did you see the report that they're talking, the guy who just won the Euros yesterday, the Spain manager? Apparently, he's reached out to the United States, and I think that's totally a case of a guy trying to get himself a raise, being like, hey, I just won the Euros. Now I'm going to go see, hey, what U.S., how much do you want to offer me? And okay, Spain, how much do you want to offer me? It's a Bob Hurley situation. I think that's what we got going on there. But that was the report yesterday, was that he's been talking with the U.S. men's national team, seeing how much they want to offer him.
Little does he know, the U.S. men's national federation is super cheap. So he's not going to be able to use that for leverage very much. But that's all right. Lots of other stuff happening.
Yeah, we just spent 15 minutes on soccer. Apologies to all the people around here who don't give a damn about soccer.
That's all right. We sort of made it about football a little bit. It'll be fine. We also had, speaking of football, Nebraska landed a 4-star defensive back out of Texas to kick off the John Butler era as the new defensive backs coach. That one was super interesting because he was set to make a decision. All the stuff went down with Nebraska, with Evan Cooper. He pushed it back just a day, I think, had some time to meet with John Butler, and ends up coming to Nebraska anyway. But pretty big pickup for Nebraska, 6'2", corner, big size corner, which is something they don't have really any of. I mean, Tommy Hill's a decent sized dude, but their corners are pretty small right now. And so getting a guy like this, I think you're going to start to see the recruiting profile of their defensive backs, especially the corners, start to change a little bit.
And Weber's an interesting one because your evaluation of him, I think, varies pretty wildly based on which recruiting service you're going to see what you're talking about. Like, some have him as a 4-star, some have him as a 3-star. All I know is you look at, as you said, the frame, and get this. He runs track and field, and he has measurable speed. 10.56 in the 100, 21.79 in the 200 as a junior. You have that. You have the film, which somewhat pops. He looks pretty good. I think you combine the film with the speed, with the just athletic measurables that you have.
Yeah, and the frame.
And you say, this is a guy that's pretty projectable.
100%.
But I think what's even more important than the pickup is the fact that Matt Rule is able to kind of push through the Evan Cooper. Because Evan Cooper was big on this recruitment.
100%.
You're able to, despite the fact that Evan Cooper is now out, pick up the commitment from Weber. Because whenever he visited Nebraska late June, Evan Cooper still officially on staff.
Yep.
Took him a couple weeks, but he does eventually make the commitment. I think it was a bit of a, I don't want to say a foregone conclusion, because it's never a foregone conclusion in radio. That was a rubber band that just broke.
I don't know what happened there.
I wouldn't say it's a foregone conclusion, but you had the last visit. It was looking good for Nebraska. Yeah. Then the Evan Cooper news breaks, and he goes, okay, how is this going to change things? Good for Matt Rule. He's gone down to Missouri City, Texas a lot. He's been it's been a hotbed for him, even dating back to Baylor. To be able to push through that, I'm sure relationship with the high school coaches helped there, but to be able to push through that and say, you know what, no Evan Cooper, no problem. I think that's the big win to me in looking at this recruitment. And I don't want to put the players' measurables to the side.
For sure.
But from an optics outside point of view, media standpoint, that's what's important to me, is seeing Nebraska not break stride despite the fact that you did lose your primary recruiter in this recruitment.
100%. Yeah, this is for a bigger picture thing. This is much more about there appearing to not really be any hiccups in the transition from Evan Cooper to John Butler. And you wonder, at least I do, okay, maybe was was Weber given a little bit of a heads up that there might be a change being made or anything like that? I know it's always dicey when you kind of let recruits in on some of that information, but they usually are the first ones to know as well when there might be a change at their position group. So you wonder if he gave them a little bit of a heads up there. It's like, hey, we might be moving on, but we've got this really great guy lined up that honestly from a just pure resume standpoint, I know DB and I have talked about this, John Butler's resume is better than Evan Cooper's. I don't know if he's a better coach or not, but the resume is better, right? And he's been in the NFL for a long time. I think that's a pretty easy sell to a high school kid to be like, hey, I know exactly what it takes to get you to the NFL. We've had his defenses and defensive backs were incredible. Their passing stats or opposing passing stats against them were incredible since 2018 when he got to Buffalo. Like, I think that's a pretty easy sell, but I agree with you 100% where this is more about Nebraska not missing a beat transitioning from Evan Cooper to John Butler than it is about any one individual player. And Byron might be a really good player. I mean, you talked about the measurables, 6'2", runs a 10.500. Like, I'll take that every day of the week. And obviously, you know, Coach Rule and staff, they like those guys quite a bit as well. But just the fact that you can sit there and go, okay, we got this guy. We didn't miss anything. We're good to go. I think that's a huge kind of just sigh of relief for Husker fans to be like, okay, it's all right.
Well, because the big question mark last week, and we spent a lot of time on our show talking about this, I'm sure you guys did as well, was the fact that Evan Cooper was Rule's right-hand man in recruiting, from evaluation to kind of being that finisher, the guy that's going to go in and make sure a guy goes from being interested in Nebraska to being committed in Nebraska. That's why it's big to me here is you're looking at that aspect. That's what we were concerned about. Like, does Coach Butler have that ability within him? I don't know how involved he was in this recruitment. Could have just been a phone call being like, all right, like, I got you. I don't know. But it is big to me to see that, hey, you lost your right-hand man recruiting, you lost the guy that was in on this guy, and you're still able to lock up the commitment. That's big to me.
100%. We will be back with more Hurrdat Sports Radio. That's Elijah Herbel. You can listen to him every weekday, 4 to 6 on Hail Varsity Radio. That's right here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha. If you're listening in Omaha, what are you guys on in Lincoln?
KFOR 1240.
KFOR. So you'll hear, that's the same station you'll hear us on at 9 o'clock this morning as well. We will be back with more Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. That's Elijah Herbel. I'm Ravi Lulla. You can listen to Elijah every weekday from 4 to 6 here on AM 590 and on KFOR in Lincoln on Hail Varsity Radio. It's him and Chris Schmidt every day. If you don't listen to them already, you definitely should. Coming back to some of the Nebraska football news that we had over the weekend, we talked about Byron Weber committing from Texas. There was also a coaching staff hire this weekend. Jamar Mosey, who was at the time or until this weekend a analyst at UCF, but had been more importantly the head coach at Lee's Summit North right around the Kansas City area for the last 8 years in what appears to be, I believe, the first hiring under the new you can have as many people coach as you want rule in the NCAA. Nebraska appears to be trying to take advantage of that with the bringing on of Jamar Mosey, who happens to have a pretty talented son as a wide receiver in Isaiah Mosey as well.
And a little bit of background here. Jamar Mosey, you know where he played in football in college?
Where's that?
Oklahoma.
Oh, okay.
The more you know. The more you know. He was a running back in 99 through 2001. I don't think he finished his football career there. But, yeah, Isaiah Mosey's dad's an interesting connection here. This is something that we had talked about on our show a little bit ago as you had the restrictions get lifted on how many assistant coaches you can have. Is this ever going to be a play in recruiting where you can say, hey, son, you're a pretty talented football player playing for dad down there in high school.
Yeah.
How would you like to get your dad a job and come play for us? And I'm not saying that's what's happening here because I think Mosey, he's pretty well respected in the football world as being a football coach. I don't think you make this hire just similar to the things we said about bringing back Donovan Raiola, where people were talking about, man, you're just doing this to get Raiola in the boat. You're letting your offense line go. No, it's not that. Like, you're not going to screw up an assistant coach hire. Yeah. Especially as big as the offense line, but I'd even go here with Mosey just to be like a chance at getting his son. But hey, it's a nice plus to have.
100%. Yeah, this one feels maybe more like that's a factor than the Raiola did one for me, just because I know that's what we all thought or sort of intimated at the time, but turns out like Donnie can coach him up pretty good too. So I don't think that was, I don't think that ended up being the factor that we all thought it was. Nice bonus for sure, but I don't think it was the factor that people thought it was in retaining Donnie. It might be more of a factor in some of these like down the line hires, we'll call them. Not that he's not going to play an important role, but it's not a primary position coach. It's not a coordinator. It's one of these new positions where it's almost like an assistant position coach, or, it's like in the NFL, you can have however many assistants doing however many different things. I think you might get a little bit more of this type of thing that might factor into recruiting a little bit more with these types. But it does seem like he is a well-regarded guy. Obviously, he had gotten a different college job before this.
Yep.
So it's not like he was some nobody from nowhere.
Well, and he had built a powerhouse of a football program down in Kansas City.
Lee Summit North is...
And we've seen Rule go down to high school level before and find coaches and say, hey, well, I think you have the ability to be a great college coach.
100%.
You've seen him do that before. Let's add to it. Whenever we're talking the recruiting side of things here, though, let's look a little bit deeper than just the Sun. It's nice to have a connection in the Kansas City area. That's
what I thought this was about.
That's gonna know a lot of high school coaches down there, and can go down there and talk about the program of Nebraska and help out in recruiting in that way. Mm-hmm. That's how I see this hire, and I think it's again a big plus that his son's a 5-star. 4-star. Depending where you look at it, 4-star, 5-star. Currently an Oregon commit.
Yeah, good receiver.
And Nebraska was in there before he went off to Oregon. And
he's been to Lincoln several times.
Yeah, and I don't think Nebraska factored into his last couple in the decision, if I remember correctly. He had kind of eliminated Nebraska. So that's why I'm not like, this isn't just about him, but it is about recruiting in my mind, where you can get a great coach from the high school level that you think, as we've seen Matt Rule do before, you can develop and turn into a very, very good college coach. So you have that kind of forward-thinking nature. And hey, while you're doing that, while you're developing him as a football coach, you can turn around and say, hey, man, you're pretty helpful for us recruiting the Kansas City area where there is a boatload of talent every single year.
100%. And that's an area where Nebraska hasn't done great as of late, is in Missouri in general, and a place where they used to make a lot of noise back when they were winning at a higher level. So like, I do think it's important to get back into Missouri and get some footholds there. And kind of the same thing like he did in Texas when he was at Baylor and bringing on Joey McGuire, and what he was trying to do here with Bob Wager before he had to be let go or resigned, or I don't remember how it played out. But again, with Garrett McGuire and his connections down in Texas, Missouri's an important state for Nebraska in terms of recruiting, and it hasn't been a place where Nebraska's done very well recently. I think that's going to be really important for them to have some ties back into the area. That was my immediate thought with this hire, because it didn't even register for me immediately that this was Isaiah Mosey's dad, like it should have. Mosey's not a super common last name. But the first thing I thought of, I was like, oh, Lee Summit North, that's a good high school program in Kansas City. That's a good hire, right? It was about the state, the area, and kind of the connections in there more than it was. I mean, we don't even know if Isaiah Mosey's going to flip. Like that, to me, is, again, a secondary benefit to this if it happens at all. The real benefit is, okay, if Nebraska can get a foothold back into some of these powerhouse programs in Missouri, that's going to be a big deal for Nebraska moving forward.
And one thing I do want to say here with Lee Summit North, we call them a powerhouse. It wasn't that way before Mosey took charge.
No.
In the 3 years before he took charge, they went 1-9, 2-8, 1-9. He goes 5-5 his first year, 2-8 his second year, and then 6-4, 9-3. 2020 is a little bit weird, 4-6. But then he, after COVID, 11-2, 12-2, 10-1. Like those are the type of seasons that he turned around this football program from being a team that would have been 1 or 2 games a year into being a team that is going to be contending for a state title every single year.
He was, I think, 34-5 his last 3 years at Lee Summit at post-COVID. So really good football coach, built that thing from nothing, which I think probably attracted Rule to him a little bit as well. He's got a little bit of a history with that type of thing also. So I think it's a really interesting hire that could pay dividends. I don't know anything about Mosey as a person outside of his record at Lee Summit and kind of just his resume a little bit. But if you just look at the context of the hire, I think it could be really big for Nebraska. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see more of this for Nebraska specifically. I think there's going to be other places where you're like, the quarterback's dad wants a coaching job. Let's get him on staff here. Maybe that happens in Nebraska some. I don't know. I don't get the sense that Rule's probably, unless the guy's good enough to be on staff anyway, I don't get the sense he's going to compromise his coaching staff for any single recruit. What I do think is you're going to see him be really strategic about, hey, we'd like to be more involved in this area of the country, or we think if we can have some ties in to this recruiting base that it could be really helpful for us. I think you're going to see a lot of that with Coach Rule in these extra assistant spots or unlimited assistant spots, because that strategically pays off way more dividends than like, oh, this one quarterback's, because A, what do you do if the quarterback's not good, right? Like, let's say you were to bring in a guy and his dad is the coach and whatever, and you come in and it's like, oh, yeah, he's a 4-star, but it turns out he's not any good. So then you have to fire a coach as well as get rid of a quarterback. Like, that gets messy in a hurry if you're bringing in a guy for one dude. Mm-hmm. And so I think you will see a lot of this, though, from Nebraska, is getting, whether it's high school coaches or coaches at maybe smaller colleges that have good ties to certain areas. I think you're going to see a lot of that moving forward.
And one more thing I also wonder here with this Mosey hire, this is just aside, I have no further insight in this. I wonder how long there's been a relationship between Rule and Mosey. Because if you look back, some of the notable players that have come out of Lee Summit North, all of the notable players that have come out of Lee Summit North under Mosey have been in conversations with Nebraska. You look back, Caden Green, offensive tackle from Lee Summit North. He committed to Oklahoma and pretty quickly transferred to Missouri, if I remember correctly. But Nebraska was in there. You also had Williams Nwawan. I'm going to screw up his name. Williams Nwawaneri, the 5-star defensive end.
Close enough.
I got there. He's at Missouri as well. Nebraska was in there. Isaiah Mosey, a guy that is well regarded. Nebraska was in there. I wonder how long there's been, at least maybe not a relationship, at least a mutual admiration.
For sure. Yeah, I would imagine just from the recruiting that they have known each other to a certain extent. And I'm guessing, like Mosey's track record of developing high-end talent is, I mean, like you just popped off 3 guys right there in the last couple of years.
That are all high 4 stars.
Yeah.
That's not 5.
Yeah, or higher, right? And so you're looking at a guy that's had a reputation of developing these guys. He's obviously got an eye for that as well. You wonder, okay, checks off some boxes in talent evaluation, checks off some boxes in connections to an important area. To me, it looks like a great hire. Again, I don't know anything about Mosey except for his resume, but he checks off a lot of the boxes for things you'd be looking for.
And if he can help you land a really, really good wide receiver, if that keeps you in the boat there, I mean, it's always a plus.
No complaints from me on that one. Coming up next, we're going to talk to Blair Kerkoff from the Kansas City Star. He was at Big 12 Media Days. He will be at SEC Media Days. We'll catch up with Blair coming up next here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Wrapping up hour number 1 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. That's Elijah Herbel. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage. We are joined now by Blair Kerkoff from the Kansas City Star. Blair, how are you this morning?
I am great. I hope you guys are too.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. I know you've been busy with the kind of college football media days tour. How was the Big 12, Blair?
Well, it was incredibly hot because it was in Las Vegas.
Yep.
Which was going through record heat last week. Maybe still, I don't know. But last week it was just miserable. But interesting to see it in Las Vegas. They had it on the field at Allegiant Stadium where the Raiders play, and without Texas and Oklahoma, but with the 4 corner schools there, it was a different feeling and a different vibe for the whole thing.
And Blair, just whenever you look at the week as a whole, a lot of headlines coming out from Gundy and his statements on the Ollie Gordon situation. He also had the media show that always falls around Colorado, where Shadur's calling Colorado everyone's Super Bowl. And meanwhile, Deion's complaining that his AD scheduled North Dakota State. Well, what do you think your big takeaway is from Big 12 Media Days with all the different reports that we had, the stories that we saw? What do you think the I don't want to say the best part, but what do you think the biggest just takeaway was from you from everything we heard was?
Well, you're right about those two with Gundy and Deion Sanders. They really did were the spotlight figures at the media days. But for me, and maybe this is just because of where I'm located, the fact that Kansas comes into this season with an expectation for success, coming off a 9-win season when a couple years ago they were still at the bottom of college football, that to me is like, what's wrong with this picture? Potential college football playoff team, after what we have understood about this program, maybe it's flying under the radar a little bit nationally, maybe not, but at least that weekend because of the the spotlight on other players and other teams. But yeah, the fact that Kansas is being talked about as a preseason top 25 and a playoff contender was, to me, one of the better stories at Big 12 Media Days. Listen, when there's 16 schools there, and as there will be at all the media days, right, at least 16, there's plenty of stories to go around. But for me, the fact that Kansas is being so highly regarded, coming off pretty much the decade, maybe decade and a half of incompetence is pretty wild.
We're talking with Blair Kerkoff from the Kansas City Star. Speaking of some wild things in the Big 12, there's a report out there that internally the Big 12 feels confident that they might be able to land Florida State and Clemson. Were there any whispers going on while you were at Big 12 Media Days of anything regarding further expansion, whether it was Florida State and Clemson or anybody else for that matter?
No, I'll tell you why. Because of the timing of the whole thing, right? Big 12 Media Days was on Tuesday and Wednesday, and Brett Yormark, the commissioner, spoke on Tuesday, and every time he speaks publicly, he's asked about expansion or realignment, and lately it's because up until last week the talk had been tempered a bit. But then later in the week was when there was some more, court action with Clemson especially, but involving Florida State as well, and the ACC. So that started that topic picked up a lot of momentum after Big 12 Media Days had ended. So, but it's out there now, and I guess everybody in college sports is following the court proceedings in different states, multiple states, involving the ACC and what might happen with Florida State and Clemson. If they become free agents, I'm sure they certainly want to be in the SEC first, but the SEC has shown no inclination to expand after. They haven't even played their first season as a 16-team league with Texas and Oklahoma. So we'll see what Greg Sankey says about that this morning when SEC Media Day started in Dallas. But yeah, I think that even though the Big 12 has kind of said they're fine with what they have now and they don't want to slice the pie any thinner for its members, that if Clemson and Florida State presented themselves, even if on a temporary landing spot, while the SEC considers a candidacy there, I think the Big 12 would open them with welcome arms.
And I think one of the selling points for the Big 12 for these two teams is come to the Big 12, you're going to be the premier programs. Look at the path you have to the college football playoff every single year where, and I'm not trying to slight the Big 12 here, but it's a hell of a lot easier than going through the SEC or the Big 10 gauntlet. You have that. And I want to get your thoughts on if the Big 12 is able to pull off this coup, if they're able to land Florida State and Clemson in this conference free agency, if you will. Does that take it from a Big 2 to a Big 3 in your mind in terms of the conferences? Because right now the Big 10, the SEC are running college football. Could those two schools make the Big 12 a player that can go and compete financially with the SEC and the Big 10, or at least get them close?
Well, that is the question, right? How much value would Florida State and Clemson bring the Big 12? It would increase the value for sure, because of their pedigree. They would. Those are the two programs out there that would bring value to the Big 12, and you're right. I mean, the SEC and the Big 10 are ahead of everybody. The other two power conferences. And in the current structure, it'll remain that way for the foreseeable future. I don't see anything that's going to change that, with the exception of the possible relocation of those two schools. So I guess in my mind, what you'd have is you'd still have the SEC and the Big Ten being considered more a valuable, bigger revenue generator than the Big 12, but the Big 12 will have closed the gap. Just to put it in round numbers, and I know this doesn't apply to this year or maybe even next year, but if Big Ten and SEC schools are getting $100 million a year from their media contracts, and the Big 12 is getting schools are getting $50 million, I think that eventually, if there's a Florida State and Clemson in the Big 12, that $50 million will increase without the Big Ten and the SEC necessarily increasing. So, to what extent it would increase, I don't know that, but it is possible. And as far as being closer or in a better position to be in a playoff, the 12-team college football playoff, I think they have that right now, and maybe even in a better position in the ACC than they would in the Big 12. I don't think that changes with a conference move. But what does change is a better TV contract that the Big 12 has, thanks to its commissioners maneuvering, than what the ACC has, which is a deal through 2036 that's not going to pay their schools what they want or what they think their value is. Clemson and Florida State think they're falling behind, especially the SEC schools, financially.
Blair, if this goes through and Florida State and Clemson are able to get out of this ACC deal, does this kind of set off? I wonder what the ramifications of this are. Is it going to be something like we've seen almost with the player movement, where it opens the door to a larger extent, where it's like, hey, these contracts actually don't really mean anything to keep you in conferences? Or do you think it's more of a one-off?
So a transfer portal for schools, I like that.
I mean, almost, right? Like, I wonder about it.
Yeah. Well, what would really open my eyes if Clemson and Florida State were allowed to get out of their grant of rights for the ACC and basically become free agents in college football, then it makes me wonder what grant of rights ever meant, right?
Yeah.
That was such a big thing in the Big 12 and previous realignments that schools were going to be bound to the Big 12 because of the grant of rights, and nobody questioned it. Nobody thought, well, yeah, that you get the grant of rights. I think one former commissioner used the term handcuffs to describe what the power of the grant of rights. We're going to handcuff the schools to the conference, and although that didn't create a very pleasant image, at least we all just assumed that that was pretty. You couldn't break it. It was the school was tied to that conference. If Clemson and Florida State get out of that, if the courts in South Carolina and Florida, somehow win this, then yes, the shorter answer is then they don't matter to anybody. Grant of rights, and then if the Big Ten and the SEC wanted to cherry pick the Big 12 and the ACC, that absolutely could happen, and schools wouldn't need to come up with a buyout, or the buyout would be less than what it was expected to be because of the grant of rights. So it's a fascinating time, and right now the eyes of college sports really are on the courts in South Carolina and Florida.
Blair, as we switch gears here, you're going to be covering SEC Media Days down in Dallas. Dallas, that's going to be too far for Georgia to drive, correct?
Yeah. Although SEC fans are so nuts, it's the one media days that I think I've been to all of them for the major conferences over the years. It's the one where the fans show up in SEC. The fans come with their footballs and mini helmets and stand in the lobby of the hotel looking for autographs, and it really is a crazy time. And it's in Dallas for the first time, a little tribute to the newcomers in the league. So they're going to hold it in downtown Dallas during the week of the baseball's All-Star game. So a lot of sports going on here in Dallas this week.
That's Blair Kerkoff from the Kansas City Star. Blair, we appreciate your time, and maybe we'll catch up with you after SEC Media Days as well.
Sounds good. Great talking to you guys.
We appreciate it. That's Blair Kerkoff from the Kansas City Star. We will kick off hour number 2 with Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald coming up next. Kicking off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. That's Elijah Herbel. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage. We are joined now by Sam McKewon of the Omaha World-Herald. What's up, Sam?
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Not too much, just sifting through a rather busy weekend in July. I mean, you got to enjoy these when you randomly have a July weekend where there's actually stuff going on.
Well, yeah, I guess.
Sure. Enjoy is one way to put it.
Oh, man.
Is it disrupting your vacation or your last gasp of...
week.
There's no slow weeks anymore, Sam. There's no more.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, this week is. I mean, MLB is what it is, and then you got the Open on Thursday, which I always love. But this is the last slow week in Nebraskaville. Once you get to Big Ten Media Days, which Nebraska's on Wednesday, but the thing starts on Tuesday, everything just feels really fast, and it goes really fast. You don't feel like you have enough time to write everything, and so they'll come back in Big Ten Media Days. I think they'll kind of report. Then they'll have a camp, and then I think they'll kind of start camp. But our first media availability with them will probably be like the 29th or the 30th. I can't remember what day, but everything goes real fast then. I mean, August will fly by, and season will be here before you know it. So, yeah, people need to enjoy this last quiet week because it's going to get really loud, and this is going to be a really intense football season. Like, people, this is an important, pivotal year for Nebraska football. So, enjoy this last week of quiet and calm.
Sam, I don't like that you're putting out that on a Monday. Saying, enjoy this last quiet week. That feels like it's a jinx waiting to happen.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be anything. We'll see. I think you might see Nebraska announce, like, the retitles of their coaches, because obviously they hired Jamar Mosey from Kansas City area, and he had a different title than I think he probably would have had previously. So, yeah, I think you're going to see some different titles for some of the analysts that are on the staff now that they can be assistants. There's really no reason to call them analysts. But I don't know if that'll happen this week or next. At some point, you'll get that alternate uniform. I don't know when that's going to come, but that's become anticlimactic around here. They don't try too hard with the alternate uniforms. They try to make them, sort of classy. So we're no longer in the 2012, 2013 superhero era of Adidas alternates.
I still like the black alternate, Sam. I'm still waiting for them to bring those back.
They might. Yeah, that was in 2013?
I think so. So. Well, it's a good look,
Quietly, I didn't know. There was the alternates that came out in like 2018, the Frost era, that were the black shirt ones.
Yeah.
I'm not Christian Jones was wearing a black shirt jersey whenever he visited campus and released some photos online. I didn't know if that one was still in rotation, but apparently they still got it somewhere in the closet.
Yeah. When did they wear the black shirt ones?
It was Indiana 2019.
2019 Indiana. Yeah, they've never won in the black, I don't think. So they lost in 2013 to UCLA and completely collapsed in that game.
Yep.
And then I feel like they wore them, 2015 Northwestern? I can't remember. And then in 2018, Frost's first year, they wore those weird throwbacks that they played against Illinois.
With the Band-Aid colored pants, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't like
and
those.
Then 2019 was black. There weren't any in 2020 that I recall. And 21 was one of my favorites, the NU helmet.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they've had some pretty nice ones over the years, but they've gone very classic in recent years. Last year's was the blue number or whatever, the blue outline. It was pretty classy. Nothing out over the top. I don't expect anything over the top from here on forward.
And Sam, before we get to important football topics such as artificial turf versus natural grass and maybe Mosey as well, if it was up to you, we've seen Nebraska wear the standard uniforms either with the white on the white or the red on the red. I think the red on the red's only happened once in history. If you had the choice between the two, some people have called the whites the surrender whites. The all reds are very bright. I'm not sure I quite like them. If you had the choice between the two, which would you have Nebraska rather, or which would you rather have Nebraska wear, given that Nebraska, it'd be the easiest alternate to pull off, just changing the color of the pants?
The all whites, easy.
Okay.
Yeah, they haven't necessarily won a ton of games in those, but they did beat, that they were all whites, I believe, for Tommy Fraser's first start in '92. Yeah, the all whites. I think they look great. I think I think players would like them. They look fast, and I've always been a big fan of that look. Kind of reminds me, even though they're different, obviously, colors, of the old Minnesota Vikings uniforms, when they would wear the all whites.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s and the 90s. That was, I was not a Vikings fan, but that was one of my favorite uniforms in the NFL, when they would go with the all whites, or when the Cleveland Browns go with the all white, which they don't do very often. My wife and I watch their games, and they don't do it very often. So, yeah, I love the all white look. All red, no. No, never again. And that was, I remember the game. It was 86 Oklahoma. It looked neat for that game, and Nebraska played its heart out that game. They should have won the game. But nah, I don't like the color. I don't like that sort of color rush thing that they do in the NFL, where it's all one color. And Texas Tech pulls it off with their black uniforms sometimes. Texas Tech always looks pretty good, but I don't think Nebraska's ever been able to pull off that look with much success, and I don't think most teams can, to be honest with you.
And what the thing is with as much as we see the recruits wearing those in some of their pictures, the red on red, I wouldn't be surprised to see Nebraska pull it out once. Maybe not this year, but in the years to come, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there, and I'm probably using recruiting pictures way too importantly here. I pulled it out twice now, but with as much as recruits wear those red on reds, I wouldn't be surprised to see the team pull it out just once, because eventually the team's got to sit back and say, hey, we wore these for our recruiting photos. When can we actually wear them in a game?
Right, that's fair. I think, my son's a little young. He's 11. But red is kind of his color, and it's the color of a lot of his friends. They like red. And so we've gotten our son a lot of red stuff. So I think that color happens to be somewhat popular. The other colors that are popular are related to soccer and what soccer teams you root for. So, yeah, I think red is kind of back in. I think for a while there, whatever color palette Oregon was putting out was popular, but I think Oregon, that is sort of passé. We're not in that era anymore where what Oregon does, everybody's looking at. I think Oregon's a little garish and probably should gear back its look too.
We're talking with Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. You mentioned earlier in passing Jamar Mosey as far as him being brought on to staff. Speaking of recruiting, he's obviously got a kid that's a high-level receiver, but how much do you think that factored into the decision to bring him on, or was it more the recruiting of the area he's from around the Kansas City area?
I think it's probably the latter, and I think he's also probably a good coach.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of high school coaches are developmental coaches. They understand how to make players better to get them from one spot to the other, because there are very few high school football players that are anywhere near a finished product. And so if you're looking for guys to come in and develop a player, a high school coach is a great way to go. Tom Osborne built, his infamous staff, or his famous staff, wasn't infamous. He built his famous staff off of high school guys. Milt Teneper, Frank Solich, these were high school coaches. And they came to this level, and they were better than everybody at coaching their positions. I mean, Milt Teneper is a legend, and he was a legend first in high school. Dan Young, the late Dan Young, the same thing. So, there's nothing wrong with doing that, and a lot of times you can build great staffs that way. Matt Rule had Joey McGuire, who's now the head coach at Texas Tech. So, yeah, I think it has something to do with that. Now, the recruiting in Kansas City, I do think you have to have relationships in that area in order to get in there. Kansas City and St. Louis have kind of gone back and forth as to which the better city is. Right now, Kansas City's way out in front. This particular cycle and some other cycles, they're way out in front, and that may stay that way for a while. You just never really know. You go back 7 years, and St. Louis was out in front, and by that I mean St. Louis, East St. Louis, all both states. Right now, Kansas City is well out in front. Williams Ranieri was from there. He went to Missouri. They've got great players there again. So Nebraska obviously wants to get into that. A number of pro players that Nebraska's enjoyed, especially on the defensive line, have come from the Kansas City area. Malik Collins, the Davis twins. It's a good place to get players from.
Now, Sam, do we know what kind of role Jamar Mosey's going to have in his day-to-day operations around Nebraska, what that job title actually entails?
I don't think we know for sure. I mean, I think he'll probably work wherever they want him to, and he'll be something that an analyst used to be, but he'll now be sort of an assistant. They've got a number of really good analysts on that team who are probably going to become like assistants. Guys that Tony Whitebread over from Syracuse, just really, really good coaches. And as Nebraska, maybe loses some of their current assistant coaches to other jobs. Rob Dvorak, the coach in the NFL tomorrow, really good technician. And I've always just said that I thought Terrence Knight eventually would matriculate back to the NFL because he played in it, and that makes sense to me one day. They have guys there that can take over because they have some really, really good minds in there. So I don't know what Mosey's going to do, but I'm sure they'll figure it out.
Sam, I'm curious, have you gotten any sense at all of how many of these types of staff positions that Nebraska might be looking at adding? I know you mentioned converting a bunch of the current analysts to these new, whatever their new titles are going to be, senior assistant or whatever. Have you gotten any sense of how big Nebraska wants this staff to be?
Are you talking the coaching staff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they have already created a nice support staff behind the full-time assistants, and now they'll move some of those guys up. After that, I don't know how much larger it needs to be. I think there does come a point where it would be too large, where you have a lot of guys, but they don't have enough to do. And so I think they've already kind of created, a system of support that allows some sort of natural transition of titles over. Of course, you'll always take an elite mind if you can find it. Somebody who wants to get back in the game, somebody who's willing to come in. I'm thinking, the Boston Celtics added Jeff Van Gundy in the off season, and he probably has something to do with them winning an NBA title. And so, you're always looking for stuff like that. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I know nothing. But, Rule's old defensive coordinator retired. He didn't want to do that anymore. I think he was ready to, kind of retire. But that guy would be a helpful mind in the room if he ever wanted to get back into the game. And
is that Phil Snow?
So, yeah. There's just guys around that I think would be helpful. To be honest with you, I think on defense they're in really, really good shape. You have a really good defensive coordinator. Matt Rule is a defensive mind. He understands the game from both sides, but I think defensively he really gets it. And I think maybe adding an offensive person who can come in and be sort of a Matt Lubick type. Originally, people maybe not in this. Lubick was the guy that kind of wanted to be an analyst. And some of the other guys kind of fell through, and then Lubick became the OC, and that wasn't necessarily what he wanted to do, but he came back to do it. But Lubick helped them, to get more efficient and moving the football in the 1 year that the 2 years he was there. So, I don't know, something in there where you can maybe get a mind on the staff, somebody who's not going to recruit, but can help you get your offense better.
Well, Sam, and it's Sam McKewon with us here from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, if we go back about 6 months, it felt like Nebraska had that guy in Dana Holgorsen, and for some reason or another, that fell through. I'm not sure if you have any insight there, but it did feel like for a little bit this offseason, Nebraska could have had that guy that probably wasn't going to recruit, that was just going to be an offensive mind in the office to be able to help out with schemes and with the coaching staff. And we didn't know how much on-field coaching he was going to be doing, but that felt like it was going to happen for a little bit, and then it just kind of never actually ended up happening.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, isn't it? I just don't think it coalesced or came together, and that happens sometimes. Like, he would have been an interesting addition. He certainly understands the quarterback play and how to get offense and points. One of the underrated stories, Elijah, of this year is going to be how the offense changes and tweaks. We don't talk a ton about it because we're very focused on culture, because that's where Rule wants the reporters focused. But if you go back and watch last season, there was a lot of things they didn't do that 2020 modern offenses do. Throw the ball out, smoke screens, whatever you want to call them. There's ways to to take advantage of a zone defense or things like that. Just get the ball out of the quarterback's hand. And the first thing we saw in the spring game is that they got back to that. And Glenn Thomas, I thought, brought that. If you watch the Pittsburgh Steelers, obviously Thomas wasn't the offensive coordinator. Canada was. Some of that stuff is not really applicable to Nebraska because Canada is a very specific kind of OC. But Glenn Thomas will bring some concepts to the program that will help, especially as it relates to throwing the football. I think Marcus Satterfield has a lot of those things in his system, but you can tell what Marcus Satterfield likes. He likes to put 4 different kinds of positions on the field, get everybody kind of moving, play action pass, get a quarterback on the move. But you need all the parts in order to do that. He had that at South Carolina. The 49ers have that. I think Nebraska's still developing that. So you've got to be able to just drop back, have a concept, and your quarterback needs to make a completion, as opposed to it being, a highly structured play-action pass that gets you 37 yards. You just got to be able to drop back and get your quarterback at some early solutions that move the football and gain him confidence. And I think that's an area where you're going to see them grow very quickly this season. Or they're going to have to. Because they're not just going to be able, and he knows this, Matt Rule knows this, you can't just run for 230 yards a game if you can't throw for 150. You've got to be able to throw for 200.
Sam,
and he knows that.
I'm curious, how much of us not focusing on kind of some of these specifics about the offense that you're talking about? I mean, obviously, Matt Rule is, playing a little misdirection with us the way you described a little bit, and I don't think it's nefarious. I just think he wants us to focus on those things. But how much it also is just there's a certain understanding that last year wasn't what they wanted it to look like either, so we don't spend a ton of time maybe breaking down this is what it looked like last year versus what it might look like this year, because none of us really feel like we actually know what it was supposed to look like last year.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I will say that they went in with their eyes wide open. They took Jeff Sims. I think they knew that Jeff wasn't, although, apparently he's battling for the Arizona State job, which is, that's an Oregon spread system. So, I wish him the best. And it's hard to say, guys. When Jeff dropped back to pass in the first 2 games of the season, and they did have some dropbacks. You go back and watch the Minnesota game. One of the challenges that Nebraska had is they didn't have a lot of size at receiver once Xavier quit and once IPC got hurt. And Billy Kemp, good slot player, it doesn't work in the Big Ten. A 5'9" slot guy, you better be Wandale Robinson if you're going to make that work. And Billy's a nice player, but he's not Wandale. He doesn't have Wandale's quickness and some of the other things. And so they did not have options over the middle, and Fedoni was just coming off injury. And so they didn't have a lot going for him early in the season. And then by the time that Fedoni had, some sea legs under him, and some of those young receivers had some sea legs too. It was late in the year. And, Harburg was really banged up. People probably don't appreciate how much he played through. And then Chubba's going in there, and Chubba can do some nice things, but Chubba just never had a great shake at Nebraska. He'd always come in late in the season, and it was cold and crappy weather, and he just never had a great break here. I do think he can be a good quarterback somewhere else. So, yeah, it didn't look like it was supposed to look last year. I think they feel much better with Dylan Raiola in that spot. Maybe even Danny Kalin if they had to play him. And I think they think Harburg's going to be better. But I also think the supporting cast is going to be much better. So, again, just drop back and be able to throw the football is something that Nebraska will get better at.
Sam McKewon with us here from the Omaha World-Herald. Make sure if you haven't already to give him a follow on Twitter at SWMcKewonOWH. And Sam, with the last couple minutes we have left here, we've made it 1 hour and 20 minutes into this show without talking about natural grass at Memorial Stadium. I don't know how we've done it.
Yeah.
I want to get your thoughts on that flip. Feels like something that Matt Rule has wanted since day one whenever he stepped on campus. It finally sounds like it's going to be coming at some point, maybe as early as 2026. I want to get your thoughts on what natural grass in Memorial Stadium will look like and what kind of difference you think it makes, if any.
So many years ago when Nebraska put in its latest iteration of field turf, I can't remember what year that was. I remember we got a tour of it, and they might even had an iteration after that, but it was the turf, and I remember asking an Indy official, "You guys ever thought about putting grass in here?" And he looked at me and he goes, "No." The way he said no. No. Nope. We hadn't thought of that. And I didn't say anything else. I was like, okay, somebody's annoyed. But the reality is Iowa State, Michigan State, Penn State, they all have grass. And it's been a while since I've been to Iowa State. But Iowa State's got a pretty turf, and Penn State's got nice turf. And Michigan State's is okay. Purdue's is a little screwed up because they use the turf. They use a Bermuda grass that they use on the golf course about 500 yards from the stadium. And I don't know. It doesn't always work. It dies, and then it's a little spongy, and Nebraska won't probably be using that. They'll probably be using bluegrass or whatever they have. But, I think it's a great idea. It does cost more, obviously, to take out the turf they have now and put in new turf. Maintenance costs. That's not going to be easy. The heated field thing. I know the Packers do that. I don't know if the Chiefs do or not. The Chiefs have a horrible grass field, so it can kind of go both ways. But one thing that's true about the Chiefs, and you could go down there and ask them, is that Clark Hunt likes making money, and so he puts all kinds of stuff in there. They got the Copa event. Taylor Swift's in there. They had Kenny Chesney a couple weeks ago, so they don't give a crap, and they win a lot of football games. So Kansas City's surface has not hurt Kansas City. They've been able to win a lot of games on it, but it's not a very good surface. And the Steelers have a terrible surface, and they're at Heinz Field, but they have a bunch of high school games on their field. So right, like late in the season, that thing it's like a minefield. And so Nebraska's going to have to figure those things out. Iowa State doesn't have that. Penn State doesn't have that. Michigan State doesn't have that. Nebraska's going to have to navigate the high school championships, and then they're going to have to chew on whether they want to put a bunch more events in the stadium. For example, can you really have a volleyball day on August 31st if you're coming back home to play, 5 days later, and that thing's getting chewed up to heck? I just don't know. And so those are things they'll have to chew on. But a beautiful grass surface, there's nothing better. And if they're willing to put the effort into making it nice and taking care of it, it's a terrific surface. Prettiest grass field I've ever seen, by the way, is the one in Ireland that they played on over there. And they didn't even let anybody walk on it for many days. The football teams didn't even really do anything. They went and practiced somewhere else right outside the stadium. But, that surface was gorgeous. It was, so I've seen the peak. I mean, that was as good of a grass field as anybody's ever going to see. So I think Nebraska can duplicate that, and I think it's a good idea.
Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, we appreciate the time as always, and enjoy your last quiet week.
All right, take care.
We will be back with more Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next. We're halfway through the show here on the Pillar Exterior stage. That's Elijah Herbel. I'm Ravi Lulla. DB is out this week coaching for Westside. They've got their summer camp, but he will be back the next week, where him and I will be going out to media days as well, and he'll be joining us a couple times throughout the week as a guest on his own show throughout the week as well. So we appreciate Elijah filling in, and you can listen to him every weekday 4 to 6 p.m. on Hail Varsity Radio, right here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, and in our Lincoln friend KFOR as well. But yeah, had a couple questions in the stream about DB. So yeah, he's just gone for the week doing his little high school coaching deal, so that'll be good.
Just that little thing.
Well, it's no, I honestly think it's the thing he likes doing the most, which I understand he doesn't like me that much, so it depends on the day. But he'll be back next week, and then we'll be off in Indy for which Schmitty's going to, isn't he?
Yeah. Schmitty is going to make that. I'm not sure how he's going to do that turnaround where he's doing a morning show on Tuesday and then flying out Tuesday, or is it Monday? I don't even know.
Yeah, so
Schmitty's been on vacation, so I haven't been able to check in with him. Well, have you heard the whole saga with Schmitty?
No. I heard he broke his ankle.
We took off the 4th of July, obviously.
Yeah.
And on the 5th, he breaks his ankle.
Okay.
And then the whole vacation that he had planned was a golf trip.
Oh, gosh.
Where he's going to various golf courses across the state. And he somehow shot the best score of his career in a walking boot on a broken ankle. So, good for him. He's back in today for those of you that are going to listen with us this afternoon, 4 to 6, obviously. So, he's going to be back in. We're going to get Big Ten Media Day squared away. But, yeah, it's always a fun day for both of us where we're in at 5:30.
Yep.
And we're doing his morning show. And then as we're doing the morning show, he's like, wait, I'm going to step aside here. I'm going to pull some interview. And then I'm going to a side studio at the radio station, recording an interview while trying to fill in for him on the morning show. And then 9 to 3 is pulling interviews. And then we do the show from 4 to 6 and it's post up. It's long days, but it's always so exciting because it's that sign that, football is actually back.
Right around the corner.
Starts next week.
Yep.
We're finally here. It's those couple days of grind that you have to get through to earn football season.
And I gotta say, I'm a little bit excited for the open practice, the NIL practice. I know that, I know some people are like, "Oh, you're not gonna see anything." I feel like they're gonna show you something.
From a scheme, what's the offense going to look like this year? I don't think
probably not.
More than
but I bet they'll be in pads.
Oh, it's going to be the first padded practice of the year.
They're going to be in full pads.
So the players are going to be excited about that. There's going to be some hitting. It's going to be a bit of a showcase, not in terms of what the offense and defense is going to look like this year.
Schematically, I bet it's very similar to the spring game.
Yeah, but I think it's going to be like a little more upbeat. Yeah, high energy, pads are popping type spring game.
Well, I think it's going to be super cool to see how they run practice a little bit too, because I imagine we'll get to see how the stations work a little bit, right? Where they've talked a lot about, hey, you've got 3 fields going at the same time and all this. And I know it won't be exactly that because of the setup, but I'm excited to see kind of how the coaches interact in a practice more so than we typically get to see. I'm excited for it. I know some people are a little skeptical about it, but I mean, hey, it's football a full 4 weeks before we would get to see football otherwise. I can't be mad about that.
And what I'll say about it is from a journalist perspective, trying to get insight on this team, are you going to learn that much? No.
Probably
From
not.
a fan perspective, trying to get an inside scoop on how this team operates every single day and what practice looks like, are you going to get a good look? Yes, absolutely. Those are the two sides I come at it from.
Yeah.
If you're trying to be this investigative journalist, trying to figure out what the team is going to be in 2024 and what the offense is going to look like, you're probably going to the wrong thing. But similar to NFL training camp, where you get some of those high energy days, where you get the joint practices, where you get to actually see man, who might be a little more involved this year? Just what does the offseason of work look like for a guy, Thomas Fedoni or Prohaska? You're going to get to see those guys. It's going to be more about individuals than team, but I think that's still a really good look for fans.
Yeah, and I do think there is stuff you can take away from individuals, right? You're right. I don't think you're going to get a ton of, this is what the scheme's going to look like, or, this is, I do think you might get a sense of what guys might be like in the rotation on defensive line or offensive line, or kind of what the pecking order in the wide receiver room might be a little bit, or the running backs for that matter. I think that's an interesting one to see. So I think you're right. Individually, I think you'll see a lot, but also, I mean, I think anybody would pay $25 just to go see Dylan Raiola throw around a little bit. Like, you could go tell me it was a 7-on-7 deal, and I'd be like, all right, I'm in.
Well, I think one of the most exciting things about this is going to be that week of overreaction we get the
100%.
next week, where it's all the video and picture, and there's journalists down there. We're going to get that week of overreaction of like, man, is this Jalen Gramstad kid? Could he be the starter? Like, he had a good day, 13 of 13 from what we saw in practice. There's definitely going to be something like that comes out of this practice, and that's what I think is going to be exciting. From your friends in radio, we're going to have a week to overreact, and 100%. It's going to be the best.
I mean, you remember in the spring when they're sending out these tiny clips of like their practices with the competition they're doing, and we're like, okay, who threw that interception and what team was he on, and trying to like Zapruder film this thing, trying to figure everything out. Like, we're 100% going to overreact, and I'm here for it. I'm about that. I think it's just fun, and it's good for the fans. Like, listen, are you going to be able to take a ton away from it? Probably not. Is it better than not having any access at all? 100%. Like, I will take that every day of the week. And it's better than the like 15, 20 minutes that the media gets at the beginning of practices most of the time. I mean, you really don't get anything there, like 90% of the time.
I think the staff actually makes a concerted effort to not show them
100%
during that time.
100%. And like, I remember it was in the spring where they actually ran passing routes for like 10 minutes and everybody lost their minds. It's like, this is like a whole practice. You're going to get to see something. How much you're going to be able to take away from it, I don't know, but at least it's something.
Well, and I wonder how much some of those coaches, because like, this is just an example. Coach Raiola is one of the most fiery, like, expletive-laden coaches that you will ever see. And then you see these media sessions, you're like, wow, he's pretty calm today.
Yeah, so mild-mannered.
Yeah, no, he just knows the media is there filming him with the camera. I wonder how different they're going to be coaching-wise in this practice setting, or if they're going to just let it all loose, because you only have so many fall camp practices.
Right.
Like,
you can't waste any.
You can't have a day, especially a Saturday, where it's the first day in pads where you can waste it. So I wonder how much of it's going to be. Maybe it's going to be a little bit more laid back, but like, that's always what stands out to me is whenever the media gets to go watch practice, you go, oh, Donovan Raiola, he was pretty calm today. Look at him. He's using an inside voice. That's not him. That's just because there's a camera in his face and he knows it.
I'll say that's public, Donnie. That's not practice, Donnie. No, it will be interesting. And I wonder, I don't think they're going to treat it like a scrimmage or a game necessarily. They'll probably run some game situations, if I had to guess.
The players are going to be fired up because it's first day in pads and there's fans there.
Yeah, so I do kind of wonder how differently the coaching staff will treat it from a typical practice. But you're right. You do have a limited number of practices. It's not going to be like a burn day. Like, they're going to use it. I just am curious how they're going to try and use it, whether it's to kind of get an early test on game situation stuff, or if it'll be more as much of a traditional practice as they can make it in that circumstance. But either way, I think it's going to be interesting. I'm excited for it. Are we going to overreact? 100%. Are we going to learn anything? Probably not. But I do think it'll be interesting too. You'll get to see, I would imagine, all the freshmen that we didn't get to see in the spring game, which is, I think, going to be pretty cool because there's a lot of them.
Well, and it's the freshmen. It's going to be their first time in pads.
Yes.
And it's going to be a hitting day.
It's going to be first time in front of fans, too.
As we talk, you only have so many practices. You only have so many days where you can wear full pads and go to the ground full contact in camp. It's going to be a day for these freshmen where, you always hear these rookies.
Like the welcome to the league moment.
Yeah, your welcome to the NFL moment. You as a fan are going to get to see incoming freshmen, they're welcome to college football moments.
Welcome to D1. Yeah, like, you're going to see a couple of those, I think.
Like Carter Nelson coming over the middle. Here's Deshaun Singleton coming to take your head off. And 40,000 fans get to watch it live. Enjoy that, bud.
So that's interesting. How many people do you think are showing up to this thing? Because I heard some people act like it's not. I'm like, I feel like a lot of people are going to go.
Remember when Nebraska would hold those open Friday Night Lights camps under Mike Riley?
Yeah.
Like Micah Parsons was doing it with like 10,000 people in attendance?
Yeah.
it's not going to be less full than that.
No, yeah, it's 10,000 is like the minimum, I think.
I would put it somewhere between that 20 and 30 number.
That wouldn't shock me at all.
I bet you a good amount of that lower, like the east and west lower side, are going to be pretty full. That's what I would put it at. Probably not 100% packed to the gills, but I bet that'll be pretty red.
I think people are dramatically underestimating the interest level here because, like I said, you could just say, hey, Dylan's just going to go play 7-on-7. I would still pay $25 to go, and it's going to be more than that.
$25, that price point feels pretty right.
Yeah, I thought it might be a little cheaper, but I certainly don't have a problem paying that. That's an easy yes for me. Coming up next, we will continue with more Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. Wrapping up hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and we're brought to you by the Team Jack Foundation. Get over to teamjackfoundation.org to get involved. You've got everything you need to know over on teamjackfoundation.org. You can donate directly on the page. You can find ways to volunteer. You can see what events are coming up, and you can see what projects Team Jack Foundation is helping to fund as they try and find better treatments for childhood brain cancer and one day a cure. If you want to be a part of what they're doing, go to teamjackfoundation.org. We did have a little bit of sad news over the weekend as former NFL player Jacoby Jones passed away. And, he was a guy that was super exciting player, but he was a guy that I had kind of a weird affinity for because I remember watching him. This had to be like 2007 in the preseason. And I'm watching this guy and it kind of reminded me of the conversation we were having about this open practice. You kind of get the same thing with preseason where you're like, maybe you can't read too much into it, but every once in a while you're like, oh man, that guy might actually be good. And I remember having this very distinct moment with Jacoby Jones as I'm watching him with the Texans back in 2007. And I'm like, I think this guy's actually really good. And I'm watching him. And so I ended up drafting him in the last round of my fantasy league that year, which didn't do me any good because he didn't really put up numbers for the first few years in his career. But I always had a kind of weird affinity for him as his career took off in Baltimore a little bit because I was like, that was one of those guys where I didn't know much about him before. And then I saw him in preseason and I go, okay, I think this guy kind of has it. And it turns out he did. Now I had less of an affinity for him as he ran roughshod over my 49ers in the Super Bowl later in his career. But super talented guy, not a lot of information kind of going on about what happened with him there. But I know as a Broncos fan, you may have some...
Well, same playoff run. Yeah. And the thing is I was never mad at Jacoby Jones or Joe Flacco. I respected it.
Yeah.
Raheem Morris, what the hell are you doing? A minute left in the game. You let Jacoby Jones get behind you?
Yep.
What do you do? It's like they're 70 yards away.
Yeah. It's not great.
We had this position in high school football. Shout out to the Southeast Knights. That at the end of games, we would tell our safeties, hey, your job here, you're playing a role we call C21, which sounds fancy. It's not fancy at all. It means there's 21 players in front of you. You should see all 21 at every point in the play.
Yes.
You're going to be so deep that nobody can get past you.
No man behind you.
Hey, if they're picking up 5-10 yards, okay, they need a touchdown.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, Raheem Morris screwed that one up. Freaking, what are you doing, man? You're going to let Joe Flacco throw a 60-yard bomb on you, and it's going to just effortlessly grace right over your fingertips into the waiting arms of Jacoby Jones, who's going to run in for a touchdown. Okay, man. I still have bad feelings about that, but on the bright side, that was one of the moments. Combine that with the 43-8 Super Bowl the next year that made the Broncos go, I don't think having the best offense in the NFL is going to win us a Super Bowl. We need to invest a little bit more in our defense because we do have Peyton Manning on offense who's going to be able to figure it out despite if he doesn't have the best weapons in the league. So that moment there combined with the absolute travesty that was the Super Bowl against the Seahawks gave the Broncos the information they needed to turn it into a Super Bowl run a couple years later and say, hey, we need to build on our defense and build that no-fly zone secondary. That's going to help us win a Super Bowl. So I think the Broncos needed it a little bit, But man, that one hurt at the time, and it was never like I respected Jacoby Jones.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's just one of those guys where you circle because with his size and with his speed, you go, that is the deep threat here that we need to watch out for. And if you're Raheem Moore, you need to sit back and say we're not going to let that guy get behind us, and he did. So Raheem Moore, you will forever be on my S list for that one. But Jacoby Jones, rest in peace. You could argue that play combined with that kickoff return against the 49ers. Those two plays you could argue are the two
couple of more
most pivotal moments in that Ravens Super Bowl run, and if he's not on that roster, they probably don't win a Super Bowl.
100%. And two of the more iconic, especially really both of them, but especially the kickoff return in the Super Bowl because they just don't happen very often. Two of the more iconic playoff moments in recent memory.
Well, if you remember, I'm sure you do.
I do remember.
the 49ers had just scored a touchdown.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
I think going into halftime, and then he took the second half kick back to kind of...
And it was kind of that moment of, okay, maybe the 49ers aren't out of this game. Because it was 21-7 or something like that. 16-7, 20-7, something in that.
21-7, I think, and then... they're like, okay, they might get back in this thing, and then he takes the opening kickoff back, and then they didn't get back in until the lights went out. But
but it was like
that S list, by the way, is that your super list?
Yeah, you nailed it.
Super duper list.
Super duper list. Love you, Raheem Moore. But yeah, it was one of those moments where like I remember sitting at home watching and be like, oh, similar to Percy Harvin housing that kick against the Broncos in the Super Bowl, where like everything had gone wrong for the Broncos, and then you go, well, they just reset during halftime. Maybe they're going to be okay then now.
No, they were not okay.
Similar moment there where it was like that kind of took a little bit of the air out of the balloon for the 49ers in the Super Bowl because you felt, okay, maybe they're still in this thing. It's not over yet. It was a rough start, but then he does that. So
yeah, and honestly, if he hadn't done that, they maybe capture the momentum just a little bit quicker and are able to come back. But also calling 3 fade passes in the end zone to finish the game don't love that. But what's a different story for a different day.
While we're talking about that Super Bowl, let's bring it back to former Husker Sam Cook, the heads up play at the end of the game to waste the clock away on that punt.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of. Congrats to Sam Cook, but
Super Bowl champion. Never take that away from him.
We don't. That's true. I do that. I do tell. I can't remember who I used to interview on. It might have been Scott Shanley. And I always call him Super Bowl champion Scott Shanley. I was like, hey, can't take that away. Super Bowl champ is forever. Kind of like Olympic gold medalist. I'm like, hey, that's forever.
And how often as a punter do you, as Sam Cook, make it's a pivotal play in the Super Bowl to go
100%
run the clock out like that. So
usually you have to go to Iowa to be that important as a punter.
Iowa catching straight.
Well, listen, that's what we do here.
Leave it.
That's what we do here in Nebraska. But I am interested to see. Speaking of Iowa, we've got NCAA football coming out today. That was a pivotal part of my youth was the NCAA football games. I have to go out and buy a new system because I haven't done that yet. I'm a little behind the 8 ball here. Luckily, Elijah helped me figure out which system I need to buy, which I appreciate. But I do wonder if the Iowa punter will be the highest rated player on that team.
No.
There's going to be some defensive players probably. They have some defensive backs that are really good.
I'm curious to see what Cade McNamara's rating is going to be. Will it be higher than Dylan Raiola? There's no way.
So I was looking at...
Because Raiola's an 80 overall, which to me, I will say, seems very low. Fair. No, it seems fair.
A little low.
It seems super fair to me.
So here's what I'm wondering, though. Okay, so this is... And you may know the answer. Are they going to update them live throughout the season like they do with Madden?
I would sure hope they do.
Because then I can understand a true freshman starting off at 80. Mm-hmm. But obviously back in the past, because of you didn't have it wasn't the actual players, quote unquote, you couldn't update the rankings or the stat or the ratings live during the season based on their performance. So if they're doing that, I'm okay with them starting at an 80. If they're not doing that, I feel like they maybe needed to bump him a couple points to give what I think will be a more accurate reflection of how he is this year.
Well, for some context here, Jeremiah Smith, the wide receiver at Ohio State, by all accounts, coming and has just instantly been a dude, is probably going to start for them. If not, he's going to be in the rotation. Mm-hmm. 5-star, one of the top players in the country. His initial rating's an 84.
Right, and that's fair.
That's fair. So I look at Dylan Ryle being an 80 as a quarterback, and I go, that seems pretty fair to me too.
I was thinking like 82. Like I'm splitting hairs here a little bit, but like I feel like 8. I don't know, just feel like a little bit low.
Well, if you go in, you can edit the roster, just bump up the awareness points a couple. That was always the secret NCAA football. Is if you want to juice the ratings, make it a little higher without
especially
actually
the
changing
quarterback
plays.
Yeah,
just bump that awareness up 5-6 points. That'll get you a couple more overalls.
Especially for the quarterback,
Did you
for
see,
sure.
Speaking of Shedeur Sanders with his high rating in the game.
No, what was his?
He came in as the highest overall quarterback in the game.
Yeah, that seems high.
I believe it was a 94.
Is his
Guess what his awareness is? A man who took 40 whatever sacks last year.
What?
99.
Come on.
So that's the ultimate ratings boost that even the NCAA folks that run the game know it is. They wanted to get the Colorado fans and the people who love Shedeur
sacked by Nebraska 10 times.
Yeah, awareness of a 99 for Shedeur Sanders. That's like they wanted him to be the top quarterback in the game because that's going to help him sell copies.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I don't think they're going to have any trouble selling copies, if I'm being honest. Like, I think there's an entire generation of people that have missed this game and are going to buy it anyway. So I'm not sure they needed to juice the ratings for Shedeur, but I do hope that they will update throughout the season because that will be. Are they going to?
Thomas chimes in on the stream here and says the ratings will change across the year. Thomas, I'm not sure if he's an authority, but I'm going to trust you.
Is it TK?
It is.
Okay, yeah, he typically knows. That'll be good then, because that's kind of the one thing, not the one, but one of the things that the game was missing compared to Madden was like the live updating of rankings throughout the season. So, I mean, by the end of the year, Dylan will be a 99 and it'll be fine.
Cross your fingers.
Listen, if he's like a high 80s by the end of the year, I'd be thrilled.
We'll go be all right.
That'd be great.
That'd be really good.
Yeah, if he's like an 87, 88 by the end of the year, that'd be incredible.
That would put him among the top 15 quarterbacks in the game.
That'd be I mean, I think other quarterbacks will get bumped as well, so it probably right now it would put him in the top 15. I think by the end of the year you'll have guys that in the high 90s as they kind of have their season, but I'm excited. It's going to be Are you gonna start with Nebraska, or are you starting with a garbage program like a Sam Houston and starting your dynasty there?
I think I got to start with Nebraska because I want to put in that Coastal Carolina pistol triple option.
Okay, having Dylan run the triple option.
Well, there'll definitely be some good passing concepts in there, but that sounds fun. I play this game for fun, not for realism.
I'll say wild card. Elijah's actually going to start Heinrich Harburg at quarterback so he can run his.
You never know.
Run his Coastal Carolina offense.
Get Dylan out of there. Put him in the transfer portal.
Coming up next, we've got more Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. Kicking off hour number 3 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. And for this third hour, we're on KFOR in Lincoln. That's Elijah Herbel. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage. And I got to remind you about our friends at Union Omaha. Get over to unionomaha.com to get tickets to their upcoming match on July 27th. That's a Saturday against Chattanooga right here, Werner Park, 7 p.m. Make sure you go out and get your tickets. They've got a match on August 3rd as well. Maybe you're like, I don't want to go watch a practice. Go watch a real game then. Go to Union Omaha and get your tickets for the next couple Saturdays, July 27th and August 3rd, both home matches. You can also go out, get some news, or read some news, maybe pick up some merch as well at their shop. Everything you need to know at unionomaha.com.
And maybe you've been watching this summer of soccer, this summer of stars we've gotten, and you're like, I kind of wanted to get into this soccer thing just a little more. That was me after the World Cup circa 2012.
Okay, yeah.
Circa 2014, excuse me. Circa 2014. Yeah, 2010, 2014, somewhere in there. I was like, I need to get
14, 18, 20. Yeah, that's right. 14.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it would have been 14. Could have been 10 as well. And I was like, I kind of want to get into the soccer thing a little bit more. I picked a soccer team, started following them, really got me into the game a little bit more. The team I picked was Tottenham.
Okay.
Which is a shame.
Yeah.
I picked him because, first off,
cool nickname, Hotspurs.
Yeah. They had Gareth Bale at the time early, and I was like, wow, this dude is just he's an absolute machine in FIFA.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fun. Their logo as a little 11-year-old or 12-year-old, whatever I was a chicken and a ball.
Yep.
And there's a colloquial term for chicken.
Yep.
That I don't need to say, but I thought that was quite funny as an 11-year-old. And then they picked up an American named DeAndre Yedlin. And I was like, this is the perfect team for me. And they have only caused me pain and sadness in the decade since.
I remember DeAndre Yedlin.
Everyone thought he was going to be the next big thing.
Yeah, he wasn't.
Yeah,
he was okay.
Yeah, no.
He was fine.
He never quite found his footing at Tottenham. But I was already locked in. So anyway, what I'm saying here is if you're like, I kind of like this soccer thing, I need to pick a team. How about the local team, Union Omaha? It's better to go watch soccer, to go see it with the fans. There's a great fan base with Union Omaha.
Yes.
You got to go. I mean, it's local. You got to go down, have a good time, have a couple beers before you go down.
Oh, yeah. They got a good tailgate scene over there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. If there is any interest in your heart, maybe you're too far gone, maybe soccer's not your thing, I don't fault you. I understand it's very different from American sports. But if you're like, I'm kind of interested, I want to get my feet wet with it, I want to learn more about the game, Union Omaha is a great place to start. Tickets are reasonable. It's a great event for the whole family to go to. As you said, great tailgating culture if that's your thing. Highly, highly recommend you go check out some games.
Yeah, they've got a super cool community around the team, which is something that soccer gives you that not all other sports do, which is pretty cool. I went to the Union Kansas City, the MLS match.
The U.S. Open US Cup. Yeah.
And that was super cool. That was over at UNO. Rather than Werner, but that was a super cool experience. I've been to.
I thought they were going to beat him too.
I did too. I thought they had him.
That first goal.
I thought they had him. I thought they had him, but it was still a super cool experience. So I would definitely highly encourage getting out to any of those Union Omaha matches. They're a lot of fun out there. I will say I kind of had a similar experience to you. Mine was older because I'm older, but mine was the '98 World Cup. So I'm watching, I think France wins that one. They beat Brazil, and I just got obsessed with soccer for a while after that. I picked which it was way harder back in the day to watch, like Premier League and stuff like that. And so I became a Liverpool fan because they had this player named Steven Gerrard who was just incredible to watch.
Another guy who played for the English national team that probably should have gotten himself a trophy at some point. That's where we kind of led the show off. Unbelievable. That midfield of Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard never got one. But
yes, and then you have, you've got Beckham on some of those teams as well, and like Wayne Rooney I think was in on like the 08 kind of version, or it would have been like 06 10 version of those teams. And you just look at but yeah, so I became a Liverpool fan. I will say, and we'll get off soccer after this, but I was thinking about this the other day because of how kind of how strange professional American sports can be sometimes. We've got the MLB All-Star Game tomorrow, and like half the league is out of the running already, right? And you've got kind of the same thing with the NBA. Like there's teams before the season that you're like, well, they're going to be tanking. They're not going to try all year. And, you've got, it's not as bad as it was a few years ago, but you've got a handful of teams before the season even starts. You're like, well, they're not even trying. I do think the English football system is one of the most beautiful things in sports.
Yep, they got it right.
With the promotion and relegation and all the different tiers, like there are actual consequences to winning and losing and whether you want to try or not. In American sports, it's like, well, we're going to make all of our money anyway, and there's really no consequences to being bad over and over again. Like
the Rockies, because people love Coors Field and people are going to show up and drink beer and have a good time. It doesn't matter if the team's good.
Right. You brought up the Cubs earlier and they were terrible for decades, right? They had a couple of bright spots over the course of like 40 years, and that was about it. And people showed up because it was fun to go to Wrigley during the day and skip work and drink a beer and watch a ball game. And
I was going to say day games probably helped with that a lot.
100%, yeah. And
they were on the TV and everybody.
Yeah, they had the WGN thing and like
everybody loved that.
It was, but they were terrible for the large part of like 40 years, and so I really appreciate the consequences of the games in the English soccer system or English football system, excuse me. But
soccer, it's okay. This is America.
It's
if you don't love it, leave it.
It's possibly the best structure we have in professional sports.
And if you're unfamiliar, essentially in almost all of European soccer, but we'll focus on England here. The Premier League, the bottom three teams, if you finish in the bottom three spots, you get sent down to the league below.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for comparison, it'd be like if the bottom 3 teams in the MLB, based on record at the end of the year, were sent down to AAA, which it doesn't quite work because of the affiliations, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, imagine instead of getting MLB crowds every single day, you go down a league and now you're playing against the other AAA teams and no one really cares. That's what's at stake for these bottom teams. So, like, imagine in the NBA, the bottom 3 teams got sent down to the G League. You
100%.
wouldn't have teams like the Rockets and the Spurs over the past couple of seasons where you're like, oh man,
the Pistons have been terrible, right?
We get ourselves a good draft pick next year. Doesn't matter if we win now. Well, if you don't win in the English Premier
League, if you don't
League,
win enough, you're gone.
You're gone. You don't get that TV media rights. You're going down to a terrible league. It matters in English soccer. And to bring this back to American sports, I've wondered for a while,
college football,
if specifically with college football, if you get these super conferences, imagine you have a 24-32 team Big Ten, or a team, Why, if you could split that conference into 2 and say, hey, we're going to have the top division, they're going to play each other. This is the division that's playing for the right to go to the college football playoff. And then you have this bottom division, they're going to be playing each other. They don't have the right to get into the college football playoff. And
they just have the right to get to the top division.
Yeah. And so every single year, hey, you finish top 3, you get to move up into that top division. There's going to be transfer portal guys. They're going to want to say, hey, I want to play in a top division. I'm going to transfer up to a top school. You get that extra media rights potentially from a Big Ten playing in that top division. I wonder as conferences continue expanding like we see, and you start getting these super conferences, because you're not going to be playing everybody in the Big Ten every single year. And if you continue to expand, it's only going to get worse with, like, you're not going to know who the best teams actually are because they're not going to be playing.
You don't get to play everybody.
I wonder if they're eventually going to move to a system where you have a system of promotion and relegation where, hey, if you're in the top division but you suck, you can go spend a year in that bottom division, get yourself right. I mean, you're still going to be a brand because you've been playing in that top division. A get right year down that bottom division to get your record up, to maybe turn to some younger guys and get them some experience, and then work your way back up into that top division where you can go get the big money and get the transfer portal guys and play for a college football playoff. I do wonder if that would make sense in college football someday, because I don't think having these 24 or 32 team conferences, which is where I think we're probably moving, if that's going to make sense once you start getting, automatic qualifiers going to the college football playoff. The college football playoff is going to continue to expand. Maybe it's just going to be that you have this top division of teams in the Big Ten or the SEC or wherever. They're playing for the right for the college football playoff. Everybody else is just playing for right to get up to that top division.
I've actually wondered about it on a kind of a larger scale, right? So not within the conference itself, but let's say for whatever reason, the Big Ten and SEC, I basically think there's 2 things that could happen here. Either they're going to break away completely and create their own league in general, or if they feel the need to stay attached because of the university ties and because of the other sports, that you could go into they've got their super league of 40 teams, call it, right? And then you've got sort of your next tier of another probably about 40 teams, and then the third tier of about 40 teams, and you could move through those tiers based on a promotion and relegation system where it could even be within the same season, possibly, where it's like, hey, if you win the championship, then you get the right to play up in this league. If you win the championship in that league, you get the right to possibly go to the playoff. And maybe it is even the second division champion does get an automatic qualifier into the playoff, but the 3 teams below that just get to play up next year. I think there is a way to make it work. And as we get into this weird new version of college football that I don't think we're even close to its final form yet, I think there's going to be a lot of ideas thrown around, because there's what's happening now. You're right. Like a 32 team Big Ten or a 24, 32 team SEC is not a sustainable model, because you're not even playing half the teams on any given year. And that's assuming you don't play any non-conference games, right? If you're playing non-conference games, you're playing a third or a quarter of the teams every year. And then you have to go through almost an entire playoff just to see who's the best team in your conference before you go through a playoff to see who's the best team in college football. So there has to be a better way to do this. Maybe a promotion relegation system is the way to do it. It would be more complicated in college than it is in the pros because of the transfer portal and because you don't have contracts that stick players to teams a little bit longer. But I will say, when teams get promoted and relegated in English football, it is a free-for-all on those rosters.
Yeah.
It is it's not that different from the transfer portal. And I think that's the thing that we think of American contracts, when we are talking about promotion and relegation, you have to think about English football contracts. Those things are total free-for-alls, because usually if you get relegated, you sell off your best players because you need the revenue.
Yep.
So you get these huge transfer fees for good players to try and basically make ends meet for the next season while you're relegated, but then you have to try and keep enough good players, so you try and bring players up from other teams that maybe either got relegated or good teams from lower divisions to get you back up into the Premier League. It is, I mean, it might be worse than the transfer portal in terms of player movement when you get into promotion and relegation. So I know people are like, oh, how would it ever work with the transfer portal? And guys are only there 4 or 5 years. I mean, you're really not talking about that much different of a model contract-wise than you are with English football. Like, it's crazy.
And I think we're also moving toward the system, and you have this in the European model where there's teams that all they make their money on is they're going to find the young players. They're going to find these diamonds in the rough.
And then they sell them.
They're going to develop them, and then they're going to sell them up to the top level.
They're basically the Tampa Bay Rays and Oakland A's, like, or how the A's used to be, right? Like, they develop these guys, they draft them, they never pay them. But in soccer, you actually get rewarded for selling those players off. Yep. It's not just like, oh, you have to trade them and get assets. You get actual cash for that, which can help you build and sustain your team.
And people are going to sit back and say, well, why would a college coach want to do this? Why would they want to get 3 good years out of a player and send it up to a top team? I mean, you had Nevada's coach last week at Mountain West Media Day say, I want to build a relationship with one of these top teams in the Big Ten, the SEC, and I can find a guy, I can let him play for 2-3 years, I can get my money's worth out of him, I can send him off to a top school that I can build a relationship with, use it as a recruiting pitch, and not only that, hey, if I am constantly in my players' ears telling them, I think this school will be great for you, I love their head coach, you're going to have that carryover effect where you're going to find guys that are between 85 and 120 on the roster that were highly touted out of high school, haven't quite put it all together, and that coach at that top school is going to say, hey, I got a great relationship with the coach at Nevada.
Yeah, there's going to be some reciprocal.
Yeah, I would recommend you go down there because he's sending us great players. I know his development's great. He's going to get you right. He's going to give you playing opportunities. There's going to be that reciprocal
you might have a chance
effect
to move back up to power football if things go well.
Because if there's a system of promotion and relegation, you go play well down there, they could move up into this top division of football, and they could be playing with us in a couple of seasons.
Or there's unlimited transfers now. You go down to Nevada for a couple of years, get your game developed a little bit, and then bounce back up to Michigan or whoever, right? Like people ask why you would want to do that, but listen, you've got JUCO has existed forever. That's essentially what JUCO recruiting is. You build relationships with higher level programs and you bring it up and you get those guys moved on to bigger programs. I coached NAI basketball for a long time. That's what a lot of the conversations you have with guys is, hey, we can get you to this next spot, or we have relationships with professional teams in Europe. We can get you, if you're that level of guy, we have the connections to get you where you want to go. That's what a lot of this is. And let's be honest here, a lot of these guys, a lot of these coaches, they just love coaching, right? Like they'll coach at whatever level they can, and it's not like they're still not going to be compensated well. Like that's the other thing we're like, be like, oh, why would I want to deal with? I mean, they're kind of dealing with it already without the promise of possible promotion later, right? Like if you're a group of 5 school, you're already doing this without the upside.
Yep.
So like, what is it like? How it doesn't hurt you?
I think it makes a lot of sense.
The only teams that it possibly could hurt, which is why they might not do it, is the power to conference teams. Now, it wouldn't shock me if there was like a group where they're like, hey, you can never get relegated. That wouldn't shock me if there was a group of brands that basically got immunity from relegation.
But the thing that I keep coming back to is we kind of laid it out. I think it makes sense from an on-field perspective for these teams, but who is making the decisions in college football right now? It's the TV networks.
Yes.
And it makes sense for them too.
100%.
Because, hey, guess what? You're not going to get a Rutgers versus Ohio State matchup in November where it's 45-3 and nobody wants to watch it because Rutgers would be relegated. I'm just using Rutgers as an example here. It's no discredit to Shiano and what he's building. I just picked an example
as a team. That's not a brand.
Of a team that struggled in the Big Ten that is not a brand.
Yeah.
They'd be playing down in the bottom conference and Ohio State would be playing the better teams. And then those teams that are struggling in a year, it gives you a reason to watch them in November because they're fighting to not get sent down to the division below.
To get promoted or to not get relegated.
And it gives you a reason to watch that division below because you're watching a game in November to see, hey, who's going to be playing in this top division next year? They have it all on the line right now. It gives you more reason from a TV perspective to watch all the games. It gives you better matchups because you're not going to have these wild mismatches of teams that are just playing each other because they're in the same conference. It's going to be the good teams playing the good, and it's going to be the all right teams playing the all right. And once you get to the end of the season, you're going to have the all right teams playing the other all right teams for a chance to go play the good teams next year to get that big TV contract. And the other side of things is you get, and Steven makes a good point, we'll get to that in just a second. And then in the top division, you're going to have these battles between, hey, they're not going to be in the college football playoff this year, but they're fighting to not get relegated, and that's going to make Illinois versus Minnesota at the end of the year a hell of a lot more watchable than it would be because they're both sitting at 5-7 right now, or 4-8.
Yeah.
And it really does not matter in the grand scheme of the season.
To not get relegated is way more interesting than trying to make the, tax.com
Quick Lanes Bowl or whatever. Yeah. Steven does make a good point here that you would have to peel football off from all other sports. That is 100% true. But
I think we're headed that direction anyway.
We're not already headed that direction.
Yeah. I think your conference affiliations and everything could be the same. It would just be a matter of all the scheduling and stuff like that would be a total. The promotion and relegation would be the promotion and relegation would be specific to football. He says, I hate this take so much, and that's coming from someone who loves the Premier League.
It's fair. Fair. It does not feel like American sports. It does not feel like college football.
Yes.
But also over the past decade, we've moved college football away from the game that we grew up watching and loving. It's so different.
We have to admit to ourselves that college football today is so much different than college football even 10 years ago that I think we're at some point we have to let go of what we thought college football was, because that's been gone for a while. Mm-hmm. And is this ever probably going to happen? Probably not. But I do think there is value in trying to make the best version of the new system, right? Whatever that looks like, whether it's promotion, relegation, whether it's whether it's the top teams just breaking off into a new league so that you can still play for some kind of championship at the group of 5 level or whatever. Like, I would rather see, and maybe I'm on an island here, I would rather see a promotion relegation system than see, hey, you've got a group of 5 champion and then you got your power 2 champion. Like, I don't know. I have a really hard time if I'm a group of 5 school looking at it and being like, oh, so this is all I ever going to play for now? Like, it's one thing if you're an FCS school and this is kind of who you've always been, right? But there's all of a sudden a bunch of teams in the group of 5 that thought that some point they would have access to a college football playoff, or that, currently they do have an automatic bid to the college football playoff, right? And all of a sudden you're going to be in a place where it's like, oh, now we don't get anything. So you're going to get paid for those television rights deals, but it's going to be like a Pac-12 contract. It's not going to be big-time college football money anymore, and you're just sitting there and you go, okay, so what do we do now? Like, that's not a good solution either. Well, and that's where we're currently headed, by the way.
To me, what the next 10 years of college football is going to be, and they're kind of trying to do this as we talk about the roster limits that they're trying to bring into college football, is they're trying to find a way to make the game less about who's got the biggest and best NIL collective. Because that's what the game is right now, and if it's not right now, it's going to be in 5 years. It's going to be, hey, you're going to be competitive and you're going to be good if you bring in the most money for your NIL and you're able to pay the players the most. That's what college football is turning into.
Which, by the way, is the one major flaw with European soccer also.
Yeah.
It's whoever has the most money usually gets to win.
And this wouldn't completely fix that system, but it would make the totality of games more watchable, and it would make the teams that don't have the NIL much more important in the scheme or the grand scheme of college football than it is right now. I'm not saying it's a perfect system.
No.
There's definitely pros and cons, and there's going to be pros and cons to any way you change college football. But I think you can look at college football right now as a whole. And this is just our take right here.
Yeah.
This is not the definitive, this is the right way to do it, but there needs to be conversations in college football of how do you bring this game back and make more teams important, more games important. How do you make it more fun as a whole, as opposed to just, well, Georgia and Ohio State and Bama have the most money, so they're going to keep on winning.
Yeah, the only way to get the solution we're trying to without some major overhaul to the system itself is, like a salary cap is going to be one, which is going to be super hard to enforce. The NCAA can't enforce anything as it is. Every time they go to court, they get beaten to death by whatever ruling comes in. So not sure how they'd enforce a salary cap. They couldn't enforce a salary cap when you weren't allowed to pay players. I don't know how they're going to enforce a salary cap when you are allowed to pay players.
And the salary cap kind of brings into question the monopolizing and a whole bunch of different workforce issues. The Supreme Court would have to go back on previous precedents they've set in terms of the open market.
They would have to get the same exemption that the professional leagues get, and the courts have not shown a lot of favor to the NCAA based on how they've operated in the past, so I'm not sure that they would get that. The other thing is you're dealing with a world in which the money does matter so much that even if you do, the only other way to keep this thing is to kind of try and turn it into college basketball, which currently the lower level teams don't have the resources to make it an interesting product the way we do with March Madness. Like, there's a reason we watch these small conference tournaments and the opening round games, and we try and watch the upsets and stuff like that, because you only need a couple guys to make a difference and to be able to upset a big school. With football, you need too many guys, so you have to have a lot of resources in order to have those type of upsets. And I don't think that people in college football want to deal with having to watch, because I've suggested this in the past, and the backlash I always get is like, well, there's not 16 good teams. There's not 32 good teams that you could have a playoff with. The number one team would beat the hell out of the number 32 team and all this stuff. And I get it, right? But until you get the money involved with making the college football playoff, or from some other system like a promotion relegation system, you're not going to be able to get competitive enough to be a real contender. That's what's beautiful about the college basketball system, is if you win a couple games in March, all of a sudden you've got a lot more money coming your way for a few years, and you can build a team. Right now, college football doesn't have that. And until they expand probably past 12 teams a little bit, and you're getting one group of 5 team in there every year, you're not going to have that. And that becomes a problem of the haves and have-nots, a problem that relegation kind of fixes. Yep. And that's the point of all this. Are we ever going to see relegation in college football? Probably not. But it would work.
We can see it probably not, but we just talked about it for 20 minutes. So.
I mean, it's July 15th. That's what we do. Coming up next, we're going to try and get a hold of DB, see if he's got any thoughts on what happened this weekend. We've got some Nebraska news to catch up with him on as well. And maybe we'll see how practice went as well. We'll be back with more Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, KFOR in Lincoln. That's Elijah Herbel. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage, live from Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. We're efforting good old DB here. He might still be getting out of meetings from practice, so we'll see if he's available this morning. But he'll be out for the rest of the week, as he is with Westside for practice this week. But he will be back next week, as him and I head to media days as well. Really fast, do you think Damon's the type that at the end of practice will run gassers with the players to show like that sense of unity? Right? He could be running gassers right now. I think last year he used to run with Caleb some, as he was. So I don't know if he does it all the time or if it was just a Caleb thing. But he'll get out there and run a little bit. Well, that's what we're going to go with right now. Damon is out there running gassers with the team right now. He'd never wear short sleeves. So he's out there like in long sleeves with 90 degrees already at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he's running probably his gassers in long sleeves right now. But there's always that one coach for especially football teams that's like, you guys are tired? I'm a 40-year-old man. I'm going to come out here and run with you guys. It ain't that hard. It's like, you didn't just go through a 2.5-hour practice, man. You were standing there blowing a whistle all day. I do appreciate those kind of coaches, though. Yeah, no. And Damon strikes me as that kind of guy. I think out there and run with the boys. I think he would get after a little bit. So we'll see. See if we can get a hold of him if he's available. And there is no worse feeling than being a high school athlete and a 40 to 50-year-old man beats you in a gasser. Oh, 100%. Yeah. You're just like, oh. It does make you run hard because you're not going to let that guy beat you. It does make you feel a little bit better when that coach did play at Nebraska. That makes it a little bit better. I know, like, some of my coaches, if they beat you in a race, it's like, ooh, that's a tough look, guy. There's no national championships on that resume. That's a tough look. We got a lot of very strong reaction to the promotion relegation talk there. I love it. I do too. Listen, I think there's a couple things that need to be understood here. Number one is I think people are holding on to this idea of college football that doesn't exist anymore. Yes, a promotion and relegation system would be dramatically different than what we have now. But what we have now is dramatically different than what we had 10 years ago, and even more dramatically different. You want to go back to a pre-BCS era, it's unrecognizable to what we have now. So I think sometimes we get this idea in our head of what college football is that it hasn't been for a long time, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is Is it a perfect system? No. But most of the objections that I've heard, whether it's the rich get richer or things like that, are already true. These are things that are already happening in college football. Like Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, all these teams, whether it's with the collectives, whether it's with transfers, whether it's NIL, they're already getting richer, right? There's just no opportunity for the have-nots to currently get richer as well. That's kind of the thing we're trying to solve for, because there's nothing's ever going to stop the rich from getting richer. That's part of the benefits of being rich, right? Is you just keep getting richer if you know what you're doing. Sometimes you see Nebraska or Alabama pre-Saban, or you see teams fall on hard times, right? So it's not impossible. But if you know what you're doing and you're rich already, that's going to serve you really, really well, and you're going to stay there. The idea is to figure out how to give other teams and other programs the opportunity to get rich. And that's what we're talking about with a promotion relegation system. Or another system and thing I've suggested that people also don't like is an expanded playoff, where you've got access to the playoff for the group of 5 teams and things like that. Though, unless you give them access one way or another, then the poor will never have the opportunity to become rich. That's what we're talking about, whether it's promotion relegation or an expanded playoff or whatever. If you don't want the rich to always be the rich, and you want to see whether you think, and I hate to break it to you, despite the results, Nebraska is still one of the rich right now. Resources, facilities, all these things. Nebraska has the infrastructure to be that program, even though the results haven't been there. We're talking about everybody else. And so it seems like people don't really appreciate the problem that A, exists, and B, we're trying to solve. Because the other problem of the rich getting richer, that's not going anywhere. I'm not even going to try and solve that problem, because it's not going anywhere, because none of these people will ever agree to a salary cap. And even if they did, as I said in the last segment, no one's ever going to be able to enforce it. Mm-hmm. It's just not happening. So when we're talking about whether it's expanded playoff or it's promotion relegation, what we're talking about is, okay, if you can't stop the rich from getting richer, how do you create a system in which other people at least have a chance to get rich?
Yep.
That's all we're talking about. And it does solve for that problem. Are there other problems? Sure. But this is an NCAA football video game. Like, you can't just take Sam Houston State and take them to the national championship and get there, it's harder now. They've made it harder in the games than they used to. You used to be able to get there in like 3 years, right?
One recruiting class.
Yeah, one recruiting class. You get 25 stars at Sam Houston State, and you're good to go, right? Like, they've made it harder, but it's still dramatically easier than it is in real life. There's no current path, really, to have that exist in real life. And college football would be better if it did. Like, I really believe that. College football would be a better product if that path existed.
And, this is not a system that would instantly bring parity to college football.
No.
The rich are still going to be rich.
Yes.
There's still going to be poor teams in college football. As you said, it just gives upward mobility.
Yes.
And, hey, on the flip side of things, it gives downward mobility as well.
Yeah. There's consequences for being inept.
Yes.
And there should be.
Exactly.
There should be consequences for being bad at what you do.
People are saying, man, I wouldn't want to see Nebraska playing the bad teams in college football. Okay, on one hand, I understand where you're coming from.
I get it. Yeah, I do.
On the other hand, wouldn't it have made Nebraska a lot more watchable over the past decade instead of playing Ohio State and Michigan and Iowa and Wisconsin and getting curb stomped every single year? If you're playing some lower teams and giving yourself a chance to develop some talent against teams that you're actually competitive against, give yourself a chance at a 10-2 season. I know it's against lesser competition.
Yeah.
But a chance at a 10-2 season, which you go turn around and sell to recruits and say, hey, we're successful here. We're moving up a level now.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to play some harder competition this year. We need a guy like you, but we've the proof is in the pudding. We're a good football team. We're beating the teams here in this division. You can prove you're competent,
right?
Yes. It just gives a chance to upward mobility, and it gives a chance, maybe not for parity across all of college football. That's never really been a thing, and it's even less of a thing now.
Yeah.
But it just gives you a chance to play the teams that are at your level, a chance to beat the teams that are at your level. And if you can't beat the teams at your level, you get sent down a level to play teams that are more at your level. Is it a perfect system? Not by any means.
No.
Not by any means.
But neither is what we have now. Let's not have any misconceptions about how good the system is now.
It's horrible right now.
Right? Like, people as soon as they expanded to 12, people complained. When they expanded to 4 teams, people complained. When they went to the BCS, people complained. Like, no one has ever been happy with the system of college football, except when your team is winning it. Mm-hmm. That's the only time anyone's ever happy.
Maybe it's the accelerated changes though that people are getting.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, because you went from it being one way for decades, and then next thing you know, you're changing it, and then you're changing it after 5 years. Now you're now within the last 5 years, you have all of this change from everything across the board, from the changes in the conferences to the changes in NIL to the changes in the college football playoffs to expanding it from this amount of teams to this amount of teams. I mean, it's the accelerated change is. I mean, it's not out of control yet, but we don't necessarily want it to get there.
Well, that's why I think I'm kind of arguing for a dramatic change to college football as a whole, because of the accelerated change we're seeing. It's getting further and further away from the game that we know and love.
Yeah.
And I think this, while it would be a dramatic change, would there be hiccups? I am sure. Would it be a perfect system? No, not by any means. But
I think
a dramatic change
it more to the essence, right? It's going to look different, but it returns it more to the essence of what we love about college football.
And it gives, as college football changes dramatically, it gives a team a chance to reform itself dramatically within a couple of seasons. People look at the downsides of, man, 1 or 2 bad seasons and you're playing horrible competition and your program's falling off. On the flip side of things, 1 or 2 good or great seasons, one player can take you from a bad division up to a good division.
Yeah.
As simple as that. It just brings excitement back to college football. That's what college football has been lacking a little bit.
Yeah.
Every single year. Who's going to be in the college football playoff this next year? Georgia's going to be in there. Alabama's going to be in there. Ohio State, Oregon. The teams that have a great NIL program that have been great over the past 5 years are going to be in the college football playoff this season. This just gives a chance to bring excitement back where you don't quite know what's going to happen. We had one comment get brought up here. It was from Will saying, it makes sense in theory, but it could be difficult due to injury attrition in football. You could get relegated due to uncontrollable factors such as an injury. Yeah, it's brought up on the stream here for those that are following along on the live video stream. Let's just say there were guys that are elite that get hurt is what he brings up. Well, from a Nebraska perspective, that happens to Nebraska, it sucks. From an outsider's perspective, imagine it happens to Ohio State.
Yeah.
One season could take Ohio State down a division and bring some more excitement back to college football. It's just... For me, it's a way to bring excitement and interest back to college football. It's not perfect, no, but I think it could be fun.
It would be fun, and let's be honest, not perfect now either.
Yeah.
Like, we've been in a broken system for a while. Like, maybe break it a little more, and it actually gets better, right?
That's an interesting way to put it.
Break the mold a little bit more, because we're trying to hold on to something that doesn't exist anymore. Coming up, we'll wrap up the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Wrapping up the show here on a Monday on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, KFOR in Lincoln. That's Elijah Herbel. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage. Just out here making people mad about college football. That's okay. You're going to be happy in a few hours when NCAA football drops. It'll be good. Everybody's excited. You've got a show to do right after it drops, though, so I don't know how much you're going to get in until later.
You know, it's exciting. It is very exciting, Shane. Don't get me wrong here. My concern is the game drops at 3 o'clock Central Time for those that have pre-ordered.
Yep. I
will be doing a radio show. I'm going to get home. My roommate is a middle school teacher.
Okay.
On summer break.
So not doing a lot right now.
Doing damn near nothing. By the time I get home, which will be roughly 8:30.
Okay.
He will have 5-6 hours of gameplay under his belt.
Yeah, he's going to be ahead of you a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of it.
A little bit ahead.
A lot of it. So that is my concern. Considering the fact that he doesn't have work tomorrow or anything, he's probably going to be able to stay up later than me tonight to continue getting better than me. I am concerned, maybe not today. I might be able to get him once today.
Yeah.
I'm concerned where we're at by Saturday.
Yeah,
once he's had a whole week to stack.
Yeah.
Playing this a lot, I'm not going to be able to catch up with him until probably school year starts up again.
Oh, yeah. Once school year starts up, you'll have an opportunity.
But then the problem is football season and my life gets very busy again.
That's true.
Yeah.
You may never catch him.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
You might have a real problem on your hands. It's not great.
It's not great, but I also understand I am not 12 years old anymore. I'm not going to have time to get really good at this game.
That's fine. Yeah,
that's fine. That's fine. I'm not in my video game era of life anymore. I don't play video games much anymore.
So you might be playing on varsity instead of like Heisman. Is that
yeah, maybe even like JV.
Yeah, maybe play freshman mode, you know?
So we'll see how that goes. At the end of the day, it's just good to have NCAA football back.
It's good to be back in our lives. I'm excited about it.
I'm going to use this as a research tool for show topics. Like,
it's
like,
great.
I'm not even gonna watch college football on Saturdays anymore. I'm just gonna play the game and be like, yeah, that team must be really good. They went 10-2 in my dynasty.
You're like, this team
10, 11, 12.
Exactly.
This
Like,
team just ran roughshod over the Mountain West. They must be good.
when we were talking like up a team, and Elijah, they're at 2-7 right now, but they're not in my dynasty mode.
But in my dynasty, they're incredible. It'll be fun. I'm excited about it. It'll be good. One thing that also happened over the weekend that I kind of wanted to bring up, and I do, there is a tie into Nebraska football here too, so I don't want people to freak out about, I'm going to bring up tennis for a second here. Carlos Alcaraz won Wimbledon yesterday, the men's championship, straight sets over Novak Djokovic. But there was a moment in the third set where Carlos Alcaraz had 3 match points on his serve and blew it. There was one weird volley where somebody screamed in the middle of a point, and then he missed an easy overhead shot that would have won the championship. And you're sitting there and you're like, that's a pretty weirdly devastating moment for Carlos Alcaraz. And he's up 2 sets. He's got the opportunity to put the championship away, blows 3 straight opportunities, and then comes back and wins the tiebreaker in that set to win Wimbledon. And I'm kind of sitting there thinking about that opportunity there and his ability to kind of wipe it away, bounce back, and still win without having to go to the extra set, without having to kind of regroup over a long period of time. Like almost instantly, he was able to refocus, reshift his attention, and get back to where he needed to be. And I was kind of amazed by it. Like in real time, I was just like, that's incredible. Because like that has to be, like most people would dwell on that for a hot minute, right? Like that's not a normal thing to just be able to move past in the moment. And I'm sitting there and I equate everything to Nebraska football because that's just what we do here, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm wondering, like, I'm watching Jeff Sims last year at the beginning of the season, right? And that seemed like, I get it, right? Jeff Sims is not a perfect quarterback. We heard Sam talking about it earlier this morning, but he wasn't what we saw last year either. Like, if you watch him at all at Georgia Tech, like, yes, he's a flawed quarterback. He wasn't this guy that was totally inept, right? Like, there was some level of being able to move the ball, and he had good games against good teams.
He could catch snaps.
Yeah, like he could catch snaps, and he wasn't like a constant turnover machine. Like it was obviously something that got in over his head, and he couldn't find his way back out, right? It kind of got to the same thing with Nebraska's inability to close out games at the end of the regular season as well, right? Where it's like, man, they really can't seem, whether it's they kick the field goal, they don't kick the field goal, whatever it is.
There always seems to be that moment where they tighten up.
Yes, when they're just like, or something bad happens, and you're like, they can't go and get it back, right? And I thought they did better throughout the course of the season in terms of, in previous years, you'd see that happen early in a game. Like the onside kick at Northwestern is a great example of this, right? It's an easy like punchline to make, but it is a good example of what I'm talking about, where Nebraska still had that lead. They had every opportunity to still win that game, and they couldn't get over this thing that they blew it on.
You saw the team have that here we go again.
Yes. And I thought they did much better of not letting that happen early in games this year or this past year, but it did seem like they kind of had a hard time getting over the hump at the end of games. And I just wonder, like, Nebraska, I don't know that Nebraska has to be any more talented than they were last year, although I do think they are, right? But if you take the exact same talent from last year and just give them like 10% more of what we saw from Carlos Alcaraz yesterday, we're talking about totally different things here, right? DB talks all the time about why can't we win like Iowa? And I always kind of push back a little bit. I'm like, hey, like, the special teams and defensive proficiency is kind of an anomaly at Iowa, right? But what I do think they could win like Iowa is just always having the ability in those moments to get to the next thing. Because that's what Nebraska's been missing, that Iowa, despite not being off the charts talented most years, has always been able to do. And I wonder how long that takes. right? Like, how long does it take to teach guys who've been through a lot of these things? Because there's a lot of guys that have been here for 4, 5, 6 years, right? How long does it take those guys? And is it even possible? Do you just have to get new guys? Like, that's the thing I don't know, is how do you get guys from being in a spot where 3 years ago there's an onside kick against Northwestern and they can't get over it, to last year where they get over things that happen early but can't get over the hump late, to, okay, this year, can they be those guys? That's the $1 million question to me.
And it's a reason why Matt Rule makes as much money as he does.
Yeah.
Is Matt Rule is getting paid to answer these questions. But
so you're saying it's a $9 million question?
Probably. It's one of those things though where I look at is it one of those things where you just have to do it once?
Yeah.
I mean, and there's elements of it that I think are really important in being able to do it. One is that trust in yourself and that trust in that person next to you. Mm-hmm. That's really, really important that I think might get undersold. Is like, why did Adrian, I think, struggle late in games? Because I don't think he trusted the guys around him.
Yeah.
He tried to do too much on his own shoulders, and it would lead him astray because he did not trust the guys around him enough.
Because what's the difference we saw with him at Kansas State? Played much more within himself before he got hurt. Yep. Played much more within himself, was way more efficient because it felt like he trusted the guys more.
Like, how much does it make a difference if you have a quarterback under center, the leader of your offense that you trust?
Yeah.
As a wide receiver, you trust, hey, if I get open late in the game, he's going to throw me the football.
Or a running back. You don't feel like you have to make that extra move because it's not the end of the world if you don't go from, hey, I need, instead of getting 3 yards here and then just doing what the play is, I got to get 6 because otherwise we're not getting this first down.
Or as a defensive lineman late in the game, whenever you're trying to get the ball back, you're down by, say, 3 points, you trust the linebackers and the other defensive linemen enough that you're not trying to do something stupid and shoot a gap and now it's a 14-yard gain because you've shot a gap and you've left your responsibility wide open. I think that's going to be huge is, do you trust the guy next to you late in those moments? Mm-hmm. And do you trust that guy next to you is not going to have that, oh, here we go again moment where that self-doubt creeps in? Mm-hmm. And I think Matt Rule is making a lot of money because he has to figure out a way to answer those questions and ask himself, man, how do I make sure that those guys don't have that, oh, here we go again moment? And it starts to me in off-season conditioning, off-season 100%. Training, building that brotherhood, trusting the guy next to you. And once you have that trust and once you have that confidence in yourself that, hey, this year's different, this year we have more talent, this year, whatever the reason could be. Maybe it's the quarterback under center. Maybe it's the fact that you've been working out all offseason. Maybe it's the position coach that you trust is going to put you in a position to win through game plan, scouting report, whatever it's going to be, the week of practice that you've had. Once you have that, then it comes down to me to doing it.
Yeah.
Do you have that moment? Maybe it's the crowd at home against Colorado is going to will you over the line. Yeah. Whenever things get a little bit hairy, you're going to say, hey,
but you got to do it once.
We have the crowd behind us. I think you have to do it once to gain that confidence in yourself to say we can do it. Because there's so many moments last year where they're close.
Yes.
And little things. It was different than this. The wheels would fall off under Scott Frost late in games. Last year,
or early in games.
Or last season, it was one little moment late in the game. I mean, look at Maryland, look at Wisconsin, look at one little moment late in those games lost you. One game where you get over that hump because somebody makes a play, somebody trusts the guy next to them, somebody doesn't try to play with them. Do it one time, and I think that it can start to change. Yeah, one game will not fix it. One game can start to get that boulder moving downhill.
Well, and it's that proof of concept we talk about, right? We talk about with recruits all the time. It's like, hey, the reason Nebraska's missing out on some of these 4- and 5-star guys is because they don't have the proof of concept yet. That applies to other things too, right? Like, guys on the team need to see the proof of concept too, where it's like, hey, we're not going to crumble in these situations. We can go out and make a play. We can go and do the thing that needs done in order to get a win instead of taking that loss. And it is what you're talking about, where if you see it happen one time, or if you make it happen one time, right, you can draw on that for the rest of the season or the rest of your career or whatever. And guess what? Then it goes from it happens one time to it happens 3 times to just this is what we do. That progression is going to make all the difference between what we saw last year and what we hope to see this year. That to me is where this all hinges on. And I don't know. Maybe we'll see a little bit on our NIL practice. Probably not. Elijah, thanks for joining me today. Elijah will be back on Thursday. You can also hear him every weekday 4 to 6 on KFOR in Lincoln, AM 590 in Omaha. I will be back tomorrow with another guest host here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.